Go and throttle up.
Discovery Roger, go for deploy.
Thanks to you and to everybody in the shuttle program. The crew is go for launch.
Roger, nice to be in orbit.
We have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today.
You're looking live at the Crew Dragon spacecraft on top of a Falcon 9 rocket set to launch 3 astronauts and 1 cosmonaut to the International Space Station in a little more than 3 hours. And welcome to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida for live coverage of NASA and SpaceX's launch of Crew-6, now streaming in 4K resolution. I'm NASA's Daryl Nail, and with me is NASA astronaut Raja Chari. Great to have you here, Colonel.
Super happy to be here, Daryl, and what a beautiful night for a launch, other than some mosquitoes.
You know, something interesting about Raja being here, besides the mosquitoes, which are a little bit of a bother, is he has actually never witnessed a launch firsthand.
Yeah, so Kayla and I, our first launch was being on the rocket, and so Kayla got to see one. Now I get to see one live myself. So looking forward to seeing it from the outside.
We are going to enjoy seeing and hearing it through your perspective as you watch it for the first time. But you were in the rocket,
Yes.
and that's why you're here to give us all of that.
Exactly. I don't get a whole lot of pity when I tell people I haven't seen it.
No, not at all. Well, let's talk about Crew-6. They are already getting suited up, and we've got a little bit of video that was recorded earlier, less than an hour ago, of Crew-6 in that historic astronaut crew quarters suit-up room. And there you see the commander, Stephen Bowen, in his seat. It is exactly as the seats are inside the Dragon. There's Woody Hoburg, the pilot for today.
Yep, that's exactly it. The foam, the fittings, and everything like that are exactly, they're Sultan, one of the mission specialists. And so what they do is 2 by 2, they pressurize them up, check the comm system, and basically are checking to make sure there's no malfunctions in the suit, because you'd rather fix that there than out on the pad.
Absolutely. And so they're also connected up there, right, with those umbilicals?
They
just
are,
like
yep,
they
just
are?
like they are in the spacecraft. So they're checking out the suit side umbilical connection, make sure the cooling's working, make sure the comm's working. They take them up to pressure just like they would in the suit pressure checks, and make sure that there's 2 layers of the suit. There's a pressure garment and then a restraint garment. And so they're making sure all the zippers for both those layers are holding correctly before they go out to the pad.
Good to get them all zipped up before they go out there to the pad. Now, throughout the broadcast, you will hear pre-launch communication audio between the core and the astronauts. The core is the crew operations resource engineer with SpaceX. We will try to pause to hear what that person is saying, and so you can hear what the core is saying. You will also hear others from the launch team too, including the launch director, the mission director, and others. And Raja, you remember the back and forth with those individuals, and it's really critical to be able to communicate with the ground team.
Yeah, so we've simmed with these people, so by the time the crew's in here, there's the same voices they've heard the last few weeks of the sims, and so it's kind of reassuring to hear them again. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of ground loops that we don't hear in the Dragon, and they're tying certain people and certain control loops onto the ones that the crew can hear, and so you're checking all those comp links, and you'll hear that once they get strapped in. You'll hear them going through all those different systems.
And that's right before fueling, right, to get everybody on the same comm channel?
Exactly, just to make sure everyone has a direct comm link to the crew, and the crew has a direct comm link to everyone else. And there's various relays, whether it's through satellites or ground stations or ground connections, and you're checking all of those different links.
All right, very good. Now, I'm not going to be the only one asking you questions, Raja, though I love it. You know, I love that I get to be able to sit next to an astronaut and find out all this fascinating stuff. We want to invite our viewers out there who are watching to participate. So if you would like to ask Raja a question over the next 3 hours, jump on our Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch channels and send your question with the hashtag NASA. You can see it at the bottom of your screen. We look forward to hearing from you and answering your questions tonight. And now we're looking at the doors to the astronaut crew quarters here at the Kennedy Space Center, the doors where the astronauts will take their last steps before they go out on a ride to the launch pad.
And the cool thing about that door, if you look around the frame of it, you'll see the mission patch stickers of all the other crews that have walked through that door. So it's got a long history and proud tradition of doing that. So most likely yesterday sometime, Crew-6 slapped their patch up there somewhere. And then every time you come back in through those doors, it's a good reminder of the memories and the mission.
And that's a long-standing tradition. I think that went back to shuttle Though
is,
I
yep.
think they had to redo the door, so some of those
You're
came off.
exactly right, Daryl. So they had to basically, when they redesigned that inside thing, the inside corridor, but they do still have most of those patches actually are shuttle patches, and there's some traditions as well. So inside crew quarters, as they come out of the suit room, more than likely there's a Crew-6 patch, and they would have all signed that. And then around that, there's also the previous mission patches with a sticker, and they would have signed their name around the sticker.
And now we expand our view at the Operations and Control Center here at Kennedy, and those are the Teslas that the astronauts will be traveling to the launch pad in. You might notice these are black, and the previous ones were white. Talk about that in a second, and here they come.
Yep, and there they are heading out. And just to Steve's left is where they would have signed the patch already. Probably did that this morning. You can see the chief of the astronaut office, Joe Akaba, just behind them.
Yeah, there's Woody and Steven, and then behind them, Andrey and Sultan.
Andrey, and then Norm Knight's in the tan jacket there, the head of FOD, the
Core on
Operations
countdown.
Directorate.
About to step into crew walkout. We remain on schedule.
So you can see that poster behind them has been signed by tons of people on the launch team. So you can see the picture, but then all around it is signatures, which was a kind of a cool surprise to see. They don't see that until that moment when they get in the elevator and then see all those signatures.
And when you walked in there, you saw those signatures. You knew these were people that worked on your mission to get it ready to go.
Exactly. So it's people from JSC, KSC, the
Get a
Commercial
wave?
Crew Program. Woody waved a little too aggressively. No waving when the doors are closing.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they got plenty of margin, so I think they'll be all right. So we have lots for you as we wait for the astronauts to walk out that front door and the cosmonaut. In addition to Raja's analysis, coming up, we'll have live updates from Mission Control in Houston. Hello, Houston. And live interviews from our VIP viewing location here at Kennedy. And as well, we will welcome in SpaceX live from Hawthorne, California at T-minus 1 hour. But right now, we're focused back on those front doors and, well, that's the license plate to the Teslas that are headed out to the pad. And you'll see that it is a nod to Crew Dragon and Crew-6. Notice the G is actually the number 6.
It's very cool. Yeah, I didn't. I've seen our video of walkout multiple times, and it's ours was send it with the 3 as an E. And I thought everyone had send it. I didn't realize that it was crew specific. Yeah, I thought everyone got a 3.
It's a nice touch that SpaceX adds to the ride out and allows the crew, as you know, to select what they're going to have in addition to designing that mission patch. And we're going to talk more about that. Raja, I know you had a lot of involvement with the design of your patch, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the show, but we want to be focused here. You can see the crowd that has gathered.
Yep, and so right now you've seen a mix of family, friends, loved ones, and then there's some folks that are in quarantine, not in quarantine, so they basically got set up differently, but that's a chance for the crew to see family and friends right before they head out to the pad in the Tesla.
And I spy an astronaut peeking out the window.
Yeah. Good eyes. It's all, as you can imagine, very choreographed time-wise, because everything's on a very tight timeline. So when they get the signal, they'll cut on out. You can see the bigger view there of sort of what's called the O&C building, and the third floor of that building is where crew quarters are at. But the rest of the building is actually an office and a work building. And there's actually engineering, like actual manufacturing going on in that building. Some floors are offices, and it just happens that one of the floors is the crew quarters where they go into quarantine, and that's where the suit up room is at as well.
That's a sprawling crew quarters, 26,000 feet, features 23 bedrooms. Access, of course, restricted when the astronauts are there because you're under quarantine.
Yep, it's kind of like a little mini hotel, basically, like the wing of a hotel. And
a hotel or dorm room?
More of a dorm, yeah, I would say. Yeah, definitely don't have any visions of grandeur.
So we expect him to walk out any moment now? Listening in to the audio that's down there. And here they come, Crew-6, taking their first steps outside before their journey to space. From left to right, we have Andrey Fedyaev, Woody Hoburg, Stephen Bowen, and Sultan Alneyadi. And now they'll stand in front of their family and loved ones and have some exchange. You remember this moment?
I do. So we've had some time with the families and friends prior, where you actually, especially for the folks who are in quarantine, kind of give last hugs and stuff like that. But this is sort of one last chance to say bye. Maybe some long distance hugs, and then sometimes we'll also see some NASA headquarters officials down there as well. So basically a chance just to everyone to get eyes on the crew. Because up to this point, you've been in quarantine the whole time, and even with the families here on a very tight schedule. So it's just a little bit of a break before you have to get in the car.
Mm-hmm. Let's listen in now. I see astronaut Shannon Walker to the far, far left of the screen. She's the Vehicle Integration and Test Office Lead for Crew-6. Also, a Crew-1 Mission Specialist.
Yep, and then Shannon and Joe have done this drill more than a few times, so they've got this down to a science.
Shannon was our first Dragon flyer to be a co-host on the cast. There she is.
Yep, closer up view.
And that's a United Arab Emirates.
Yep. Yeah. Yep, and so you've got Huzzah standing there, who I believe was also escorting Sultan's family and friends.
Huzzah Mansouri?
Yep, and so he flew, he was the first UAE astronaut, actually. Yep.
And this is NASA's first partnership with the UAE on a flight.
Yeah, that's a really important point, yeah. First time we've had a UAE astronaut on a Dragon, and first time we've had him fly to the U.S. side of the space station, so pretty historic.
Now in the first Tesla, which is off-screen, that will have the closeout lead and 2 suit technicians. The second one, which is the one on the right that you see in your screen, that'll have the commander and the pilot, which of course is Stephen Bowen and Woody Hoburg. They'll also have a flight surgeon with them. And then the third, which is the one on the left, that'll have the 2 mission specialists and the closeout lead, the second closeout lead. And of course that's Sultan and Andrey.
So Ninja number 19 there, Sarah Stringfellow. She's one of the key SpaceX folks that helps integrate all this. And so you'll see we call them the ninjas in the black outfits throughout the night. Ninja number 12 is actually Nick Hague of the astronaut office. But that's all the various members of the closeout team that help when they get into the white room and the crew access arm and around the vehicle itself.
Getting a round of applause now as they get into their vehicles. You mentioned Nick Hague wearing number 12. He's currently in the position of astronaut support person.
Yeah, and the reason, we always have an astronaut support person as part of the closeout crew, just to help with any little things that pop up, and it's kind of nice to have someone who's gone through this before, just to any last-minute ads or asks. You mentioned there's a flight dock in each of these cars, so when they get in, they're actually hooking them up to cooling. So they've got a cooling box to keep the suit cool, because it does get pretty hot, especially on a warm, humid night like tonight.
And if you're going to have an astronaut be an astronaut support person, Nick Hague and his
core
experience, of
countdown
course.
displays are configured for crew ingress.
The launch abort in 2018. You know, this is a guy he's seen.
Yeah, he's seen some stuff. Yeah. You heard the core there call that the launch displays, like the displays are configured for launch, which basically is telling the control team that the displays are powered up inside the Endeavour Dragon vehicle and should be ready for when the crew gets in there. Right now,
booting them up.
Exactly. Yep. So at this point, kind of a last chance with the families, friends, loved ones coming up to the windows to kind of be able to talk to their astronaut before they head off to the pad.
Now the family has been in quarantine as well, right?
Exactly. Yep. And so it depends on there's different levels of quarantine depending on if, when people traveled. But yes, there's full quarantine. And
look at the high five.
And then you see another UAE astronaut there, one of the astronaut candidates, Nora, on the other side, standing next to Hazza, who just walked off to the left. And then you can see Administrator Nelson is there. His back's towards us in the suit. You can see Victor Glover is the astronaut talking to Steve Bowen, and then just over Victor's right shoulder.
Core on countdown.
Administrator
Complete.
Nelson.
Ready for crew arrival.
And then Pam Melroy, the Deputy NASA Administrator, and right next to him. So
Good eye on all those, Raja, and we also saw some family comforting each other.
Yep.
You never know what kind of emotion might come out.
Yeah, it's exciting, exciting and I think surreal, having, knowing the people who are going on the rocket, knowing them, loving them. It's obviously a awesome time. You're so proud that we've gotten to this point and they've gotten to this point, but also, as with everything, also just with concern. But I think just, one of the things that I think my family really appreciated was just how much support they got from the team around them, and it made them feel really confident that the same confidence we have, knowing that the team's safety concerns for us is paramount, and they do amazing work on these vehicles and getting us ready to fly. And
absolutely.
Off the launch pad.
And there we go, pulling out of the operations and control, the operations and checkout center. 3 Teslas on the way to the pad. And we've got a camera on the lead Tesla.
This is
looking
cool.
Forward,
Yeah, this is an upgrade. We didn't have this.
We enjoy seeing that view. We also have a helicopter high above that will be tracking them along the way. This is a night launch, so a lot of things will be in the dark. But one of the things about the night launch is that you get to see that lit up crew access arm, and you can see the astronauts as they go across, come out on the launch tower. It's neat to see.
Yep, there's a view of the helicopter. You can see it going left to right at the top of the screen as it flies over. More than likely on the wet dress a few days prior, probably all these Teslas also have an additional sticker on the windshield. So my guess is the crew, we call it Zapped It, with their patch sticker, branding it forever.
And, really quick about the Teslas, you notice they were black, and SpaceX basically saying they're expanding their fleet of vehicles. More launches. We've got private, launches as well. And so they said that they expanded and added some cars to the fleet, and they're black ones. The ones that we've used from Demo 2 all the way up to Crew 5 were white.
That's a good point, yeah. So a new set of windshields to brand with new stickers.
That's right. And so let's introduce you now to today's crew, now that they're safely inside the vehicles and headed to the launch pad. Captain Stephen Bowen. He hails from Cohasset, Massachusetts, and is married with 3 children. He holds the title of first U.S. Navy submarine officer to be selected as a mission specialist by NASA. Captain Bowen is also a veteran of NASA space flights, including space shuttle flights on STS-126, 132, and 133. During those missions, he and his crew expanded the living quarters on the International Space Station. They delivered an integrated cargo carrier and a Russian mini research module. He has logged more than 40 days in space, including 47 hours and 18 minutes in 7 spacewalks. And today, Raja, he is the position that you held during Crew 3. He's the commander.
Yeah, he is, yeah, and Steve is a great guy for it. Like you mentioned, he's the first submarine officer, but not the last in the astronaut corps. He has definitely got some experience, and as you mentioned, a lot of EVA experience. And then Steve also helped with the commercial crew program before Demo 2, actually. So he has some experience with Dragon and with the Boeing Starliner, which hopefully we'll be launching this spring. So he's got some experience on wide body vehicles. Also did some Soyuz training as a backup flow, and so he's very familiar with the Russian side, the Russian vehicles. So yeah, all around, just a great person to be in that commander role, which is really kind of like the coach of the team, really.
How about that? And a lot of that experience is amazing. Also, I read that he's the only astronaut that flew back-to-back shuttle missions, that 132 and 133, and that was because one of the astronauts had an injury.
Right. Yeah. So, and it's a good thing and a bad thing. Right?
Yeah, right.
You're definitely exciting, but also a pretty rushed training flow, and you have to be really on your game to do that.
Sitting next to Stephen is pilot Warren Woody Hoburg. The 37-year-old is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He studied aeronautics and astronautics from MIT before getting a doctorate in electrical engineering and computer science from the University of Cal Berkeley. During grad school, Hoburg worked as an EMT with the Yosemite Search and Rescue. Crew-6 will be Hoburg's first flight since NASA selected him to be an astronaut in 2017. A turtle, which we have another turtle here. He is also a commercial pilot with instrument, single-engine, and multi-engine ratings. As pilot for Crew-6, he will be responsible for spacecraft systems and performance. Aboard the station, he will serve as an Expedition 68 and 69 flight engineer. You know him well as a fellow turtle.
I do, yeah, and proud to keep the turtle tradition in space alive. Obviously, I'm super excited all of Crew-6, but I'm especially excited with Woody going up as a classmate of mine. So I've come to know and respect him well. The academic backgrounds don't really do it justice. I would say he's probably like 2 or 3 orders of magnitude smarter than any of the rest of us in our class. But you would never know it the way he carries himself. He's totally humble, just an amazing human, and can't wait to watch Woody launch to space with Crew-6 today.
And you mentioned he was also teaching at MIT.
He was, yeah. That didn't just go there, actually taught, yeah.
It's amazing. Well, in the role of mission specialist is astronaut Sultan Alneyadi. He was chosen by the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center of the United Arab Emirates to be part of Expeditions 68-69. The father of 5 spent most of his life in Al Ain and Abu Dhabi. But in 2020, he traded that in for astronaut training in Houston at NASA's Johnson Space Center. This will be his first trip to space and our first partnership with the UAE.
Yeah, Daryl, and we are super excited about this. So it is. So Sultan and Hazza both trained in Russia for a while, and then came over to the U.S. Unfortunately, they showed up right as the pandemic was starting, so they had they had to deal with being the first UAE astronauts to train. Oh, by the way, in the midst of COVID, and so the fact that they persevered and through all that challenge, I'm so excited to see Sultan going up there today. And like you said, just starting the beginnings of a new partnership with the UAE, and now in the new class we have 2 additional UAE astronauts training with us, fully integrated with us at Johnson Space Center. So this is the start of a huge relationship.
And many launches to come in that partnership. It's also the first trip to space for the second mission specialist, Roscosmos cosmonaut Andrey Fedyaev. Andrey was selected as a cosmonaut back in 2012. He will be working to monitor the spacecraft during the dynamic launch and re-entry phases of flight. And once aboard station, he will be a flight engineer for Expeditions 68 and 69.
Yeah, and Andrey, great to see the first-time flyer. So much like our mission, one commander with someone with experience, and then 3 rookies. So very much a testament to the training on both the Roscosmos and JSC side and the NASA side of being able to send that many rookies on one flight. Just the confidence and trust we have in our training teams and our systems.
And oh, by the way, today is Andrei's 42nd birthday.
Oh,
so
well,
he's
happy birthday!
He's quite the candle lit for his day.
The best birthday present you could get.
No doubt.
And they must be getting close because the helicopter's coming by the press stand.
That's right. You can hear it overhead. That's where we are, just across from the vehicle assembly building. As you look at the caravan coming our way, getting ready to pass in front of the historic VAB, where just last year, in November, we rolled out the Artemis 1 mission, the Space Launch System, and Orion spacecraft out of that building right there for a successful launch around the moon. And your fellow turtle, Caleb Barron, was here.
Yeah,
you were here as well. Oh, no, you
I was not
here.
here.
No,
I watched TV. And then that building just to the right of the VAB, the more horizontal-looking one, is the firing room. So that's actually where the KSC personnel are watching and monitoring from.
Well, you can see as they're passing there's some folks waving and wishing them good luck on the road. You mentioned the Launch Control Center. That's where Firing Room 4 is, and SpaceX has got their launch team. But just to the right of this caravan here is the turn basin. Can't see the water, but it's a large body of water. That's where we bring in big hardware, like the core stage for SLS. And it's also where several weeks ago, Raja, NASA's recovery team was in the water training to return NASA astronauts after a flight back from the moon. Let's take a look now at more in our Artemis Update. Right now, NASA scientists and engineers are preparing for Artemis 2. The mission will send 4 astronauts on a trip around the moon in 2024. But before that happens, test crews are practicing how to recover astronauts from the Orion spacecraft after splashing down in the Pacific Ocean. This black full-scale replica capsule, named Vader, stands for Vehicle Advanced Demonstrator for Emergency Rescue. It spent the last couple of weeks in the Turn Basin here at the Kennedy Space Center, where it was floated on the water and tested. Crews practiced opening the hatch and installing an inflatable porch, an important piece of equipment to make sure astronauts can be recovered safely. If needed, adjustments will be made, and then it will be shipped to San Diego, where NASA and the Navy can perform recovery tests in the Pacific Ocean. Some key technology there, Raja. You want to be able to get out of that Orion spacecraft and not fall in the water.
Exactly. Yeah, so especially when you're coming back from space and being deconditioned, your balance is off, your muscles aren't quite work the same. So we spend, it's not quite as easy as getting out of a boat when you're in good shape. So we have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out and how do you simulate that? How do you make the right, restraints and tools for the crew to get out quickly if they have to, and to do it safely. It'd be even worse if someone falls and slips. Now a bad situation's gotten even worse. And so we do a very similar thing for the Dragon training, the combination of training at the NBL, which is the Neutral Buoyancy Lab at Johnson Space Center, and then also out here at Kennedy in that basin.
Great point about the condition of the astronauts, especially since being on Orion. That's tight quarters going around the moon. Want to mention really quickly, if you want to see more Artemis updates and track them as we go along the way, please see the QR code right now to the right of your screen. You can scan that. That'll take you to our Artemis blog, where you can catch up with all the latest updates on Artemis. And now we resume our focus on Crew-6 and the caravan that's taking them out to Launch Complex 39A. One quick note I do want to mention, Raja, before we totally wrap Artemis is, in a few months, we're going to have the announcement for the crew of Artemis 2.
Yeah, so it's going to be everyone's pretty excited to hear that. I think one of the cool things about being in our office, I think most of us, the reason we like working in our office is just the people. And so we're all excited to see who's going to be doing Artemis 2 and all ready to jump in and support them. It's going to be amazing as they suss out and figure out the training flow. As you mentioned, we just had a greatly successful Artemis 1, and now the next step is to put people on board, check out what we call the ECLSS, or the life control system on that spacecraft, go around the moon, go further than we've ever gone as humans before, and then come back and check out the splashdown and check out all those systems before the next step of actually going to land on the moon. So it's a very exciting time, and can't wait to support the folks who are doing that. We already do support that, and the fact that most of us are working on Artemis programs, that's really our job in the office, is whether it's the lunar lander, the Orion capsule, the Gateway, Habitat, the SLS. So actually having crew assigned and working will be great.
Are your fingers crossed? And toes?
Whatever it's I'll cross them. I'd love to be part of that, but just the fact that we're all working on it is so rewarding.
Absolutely. Well, let's check in now for the first time. Head back to where you live, the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, and that's where we find our Courtney Beasley with an update from Mission Control. Good evening, Courtney.
Good evening and welcome to the International Space Station Flight Control Room at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Mission Control Houston is essentially the nerve center for operating the International Space Station, working in tandem with our partner agencies and providers around the globe. Together, we've ensured the station is ready to welcome Crew-6. Leading the team inside the room right now is Flight Director Mike Lammers, and about an hour before launch, Flight Director Chris Dobbins will be in the Flight Director's seat. The Flight Director here in Mission Control will lead the NASA SpaceX Go, No-Go polls once we're in integrated operations with Mission Controls here in Houston and at SpaceX in Hawthorne, working together to bring Crew Dragon to its new home in space. When we check back in later, we'll talk a little bit more about what the crew on the International Space Station has been doing to prepare for Crew-6. But for now, we'll send it back to the team at Kennedy. Daryl.
Thank you, Courtney. And as we look back to the crew with that live camera on the Tesla, that was really neat to see. That shot driving up and seeing a rocket dead
Yeah,
ahead.
that is a cool. Yeah, that's awesome to be able to see what they're seeing. And the crew got to go do this usually a day prior to go do a pad tour, but now seeing it with the lights on, with the getting ready to start loading prop here shortly, it's a much different feel. And depending on how you mentioned there's a flight surgeon and closeout crew with them in the vehicle. The other thing they're doing is monitoring their playlist. So if everything is nominal and everything's fine with the suit and things like that, their other job is to curate the playlist for the crew, to try to time it such that their playlist is working out so what the time they pull up it's finishing, and some good effort and fun goes into picking the songs they listen to on the drive out.
Yeah, you mentioned that the playlist, we got them from Dan Hewitt over at Johnson. He mentioned that Steve and Woody, let's talk a little bit about their playlist, right? So theirs was, they had some really good songs in there. Traveling Band by CCR, Creedence Clearwater Revival, May We All by the Florida Georgia Line with Tim McGraw, The Space Traveler's Lullaby by Kamasi Washington, he's an American jazz saxophonist, Sing Me to Sleep by Alan Walker, Spaceman by Harry Nilsson, that's an American singer, popular during the 70s. You might remember Everybody's Talking at Me. I kind of think Bowen picked that one. I just have a
We've
feeling.
arrived at the pad. We remain on schedule.
All right, there's your announcement that the Corps just put out, that the crew has arrived at the pad.
Yep, and you mentioned so when they drove out, they're in two vehicles. So what we'll eventually see is they'll be in two groups because they go 2 by 2 across into the crew access arm and do this whole process. So basically we'll see Woody and Steve do something, and then a few minutes later we'll see Sultan and Andrey do the exact same thing. So they'll be sort of broken up in pairs.
And so they continue to rock out real quick with Sultan and Andrei's playlist, A Sky Full of Stars by Coldplay, Don't Stop Believin' by Journey, and Push It to the Limit by Paul Engemann, which came from the Scarface soundtrack. And boy, that's some pure 80s right there.
That's my kind of
Your kind of
music,
stuff.
yeah.
Crew-6 is NASA and SpaceX's sixth crew rotation to the International Space Station since 2020. This successful NASA program is called Commercial Crew, and it's based right here at the Kennedy Space Center. So now we want to turn over to Jasmine Hopkins, who is joining us live now with one of the leaders of this program. Jasmine.
Thanks so much, Daryl. We are here on the balcony of the Operations Support Building number 2 at Kennedy. It feels great tonight, and right now I'm happy to be joined by Ken Bowersox. He is the Deputy Associate Administrator for NASA's Space Operations Mission Directorate. Good evening, Ken.
Hi, Jasmine. It's great to be out here tonight.
Yeah, we are so glad to have you here. As we just heard Daryl say, this is the 6th crew rotation flight from NASA and SpaceX to the space station since 2020. What do you think of that cadence that Commercial Crew has achieved?
I think it's awesome. You know, we're launching every 6 months. That was the plan going in. It's been our plan for a long time. I think folks may not appreciate how hard it is, but the team has been very successful keeping up that cadence. But I look back, you know, in the early days of Space Station, we thought 3 months would be a long mission. And now 6 months is just normal. 1 year is longer. You know, when we go to Mars, 2-3 years is going to be normal. And this is all part of getting there.
Right, exactly. And every 6 months, you know, Commercial Crew is really keeping us busy right now. What can you say about the continuous presence of the United States on the space station?
Well, it's great to be up there doing science. Every day the team is doing some sort of science, keeping the space station flying. But it's given us the experience we need, again, to go to Mars. The longer we're in space, the more we learn, and that
Partner is working with us. So what are we doing to support the industry in low Earth orbit?
Well, we've got international partners and we've got commercial partners. It's great to see how our commercial partners are stepping up and taking on more and more of the things that NASA used to do. And that frees up capacity for NASA to do new things, right? So we're not afraid of them coming in and doing work. We welcome it, and we're trying to actually develop the capability for commercial partners to do more. We want them to be able to launch their own crews to their own space stations someday, and that's what we think will follow the International Space Station, our private space stations. But it's all about moving NASA further out into the solar system.
Right, we're all working together to get further than we have before. Ken, there's a lot going on with Commercial Crew right now, so what other milestones are you guys looking to check off this year, 2023?
Well, we've got another crew rotation later in the year. I mean, that's every 6 months. We got to keep the crews moving to the International Space Station. But then we've got the Starliner flight coming up here soon. So we'll have a second provider, which is really exciting. We'll have 2 commercial vehicles that'll be able to take us into low Earth orbit operating out of the United States. So we're all eager to see that commercial flight test mission, or that crewed flight test mission happen this spring.
Right, we're all looking forward to that. It's a great time for Commercial Crew. Thank you so much, Ken.
Hey, thanks for being here.
Of course. Daryl, back to you.
Thank you, Jasmine and Ken. And if you're just joining us, you're watching live coverage of NASA's SpaceX mission known as Crew-6. Good evening and welcome to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. I'm Daryl Nail, along with a recent flyer on a SpaceX Dragon, NASA astronaut Raja Chari.
Thanks, Daryl.
Good to have you here, Colonel.
Thanks. Yeah, and it was a cool shot there. You got to just see of the crew arm at night. That's a really cool view with it all lit up on the inside. That's their path from the tower elevator over into their vehicle and Endeavour. So.
And it's a beautiful night out. We've got a nice cool breeze. Temperatures are in the upper 60s, and launch weather is cooperating wonderfully. We have only a 5% chance that there would be a violation of the weather criteria for launch. And the corridor, the ascent corridor, we're looking pretty good there too. So 2 areas that need to be good in order to get this rocket off.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't always think about that. It's really easy for especially the folks that come out to watch the launch. It's really obvious what the local weather is like. But like you mentioned, the bigger concern often is the ascent corridor. So we need to protect in the event of having to abort. So the Dragon has the ability to save itself off the rocket. If there's a problem with F9, it can basically fire off the top and then land in the water. And so that entire area for the first stage and second stage, we look at the weather, look at the winds and the waves, and figure out if that would be safe to do, and have to just make a decision about that. So today, like you mentioned, it's looking great, but that is trying to look at the weather for the entire Atlantic Ocean is a big challenge, and it can also, so that is not always a given.
And here come our first 2 astronauts, Stephen and Woody.
Yeah, and you can see there, so they're coming around, there's, like we mentioned before, they're going to go in groups of 2, and like you can see in the far background, you can see Sultan and Andrey still back there. And then this is always an awkward thing, was the suit kind of restrains your head. So I think ever since Bob and Doug, all of us have tried to foolishly look upwards, and you strain your neck, but it looks kind of goofy. but it's hard not to want to look, because of course you want to look up at the rocket, but the suit, for a good reason, is meant to restrain you. So it's, you'll see as they try to crane, there you go.
We call it the rocket recline back here at the broadcast booth.
Maybe we should build chairs out there or something that you can sit in.
So you can sit in and lean back. And so that's a rigid area from the helmet all the way down to the body.
And the reason is because if it was to pressurize, you wouldn't want the helmet to get so far up that you can't see out of it anymore. So it has to be sewn very tightly to restrain it when it's under full pressure. But when it's not under full pressure, then it can be hard to lean backwards. You can say Nick Hague, ninja number 12 there, will be going up with the astronauts.
There he is.
And I saw a picture online. I don't know if it was a meme or if they've actually changed the elevator panel to change the top button to say space. I'm not sure if that. I don't remember it saying space.
What do you recall when you got it?
I don't think it said space. Well, what I recall was it's the numbers are the feet of the launch pad. Right. Yeah.
And we know that the 255 is the top level.
Exactly. But maybe someone changed it to say space. That'd be pretty cool.
That would be. And I think the one on the bottom said Earth. I saw that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So at this point, they're off the umbilicals, off the cooling. You can see I think Ninja 10 there might have the cooling boxes, but at this point, they've got the visors up, so it's not as hot.
And there is where the 255-foot level, you can see the sign on the door right next to the elevator. So
Yep, and you can
about
see
25 stories up, and you go up pretty quick.
It does. It is a fast ride. You can see the grading in the floor there. The reason it's not solid, and we'll probably get more views of this later, is if there was an emergency egress and there's water up there, you want the water to flow out. So that's why there's holes in the floor.
And our 2 mission specialists now doing their recline.
We need a chair. You just need one chair. You can just switch places in the chair.
Yeah.
All right, so there's Steve and Woody coming off at the top of the elevator.
So we'll split the screen now, and on the right-hand side, we have our mission specialists giving a fist bump, Sultan and Andrey, as they head to the elevator. And Woody and Stephen, commander and pilot, now going against the chevrons, which are there for a purpose.
Exactly. So those chevrons are the direction you would go if there was an emergency egress. So if there's any kind of problem on the pad, the crew's well trained to basically be able to egress on their own if the closeout crew has already left. And those chevrons are a visual way to see exactly where you would go, and then they take you eventually to slide wires, which are basically some high up zip lines with a basket that you get into and then ride down to the ground. You can see now they're standing in front of the red NASA worm there, the crew arms off to the right, and then Sultan and Andrey are just getting in the elevator, head on up.
Those slide wires are on the left-hand side of your screen in the box on the left, and just to the far left of that, you can start to see a little bit of that structure.
Yeah,
and
you can just see it kind of angling down.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
Did you ever ride one of those?
No, I was just going to say, unfortunately, we don't get to test those. We get to test it at the top getting in, and then we test it at the bottom getting out. But just because the first time we see it is about a week prior to launch, the last thing they want to do is have us fall out of the slide wire box and break a leg a week before we launch. The Sultan and Andrey getting off the elevator, and they'll come upstairs and join. So right now, Woody and Steve are standing there's a phone up there. At the launch pad.
These are the two astronauts in the upper right-hand part.
Correct. Yep. So they're more than likely calling family or loved one just to kind of give the last "I love you" before you have to do it over the radio.
Who'd you call?
I called my wife.
Yeah.
But a key life hack is that you need to make sure that the person you're going to call has the phone number up there, which is for obvious reason guarded. But the last thing I want my wife to do is not answer the phone because she thought it was a spam call.
Oh, right. So get that number in
yeah,
soon.
Exactly.
Looks like we've got a little backup in the queue here. So the mission specialist will stand by.
And you see they're handing the phone over. The other thing that's going on is because they've got their gloves on, it's hard to actually control the phone. So one of Nick Haig's job is to dial the phone number for him.
Well, that's helpful.
Yep.
By the way, Crew-6 is the first of 3 SpaceX launches on Monday. It's going to be a busy Monday, Raja. We got Starlink off the pad 40 on Monday afternoon, followed by another Starlink launch out of Vandenberg. The pace here at the Space Center has really picked up, and that's just a testament to how much this place has transformed to become a commercial spaceport.
Yeah, it is very neat just driving around Kennedy. Like just construction everywhere. You see trucks with parts of rockets moving around. Just the other day, there was a booster stage getting carted around. So there's always something. And like you said, it is a exciting time in the industry. Whether it's Artemis, like you said, Starliner about to fly, a Crew-6 launch. There is just so much happening right now.
Tonight, though, we count down to 1:45 a.m. and I believe 3 seconds. If you want to know exactly the second it's supposed to lift off, 1:45 and 3 seconds in the morning tomorrow.
Start to see Steve and Woody going across the crew access arm there.
And that's a neat shot, courtesy of our crew in the helicopter. And here comes Woody and Steve down the crew access arm, ready to get inside the Dragon spacecraft.
And so you'll see there's a NASA meatball there.
There.
It is. Yep, and then the SpaceX for the private mission. So they basically and you'll see, I think they're about to hand them a Sharpie.
Yeah, they are. This is on the crew checklist.
Now you got to decide if you want to take your hands out of the gloves or keep them in the gloves. So it's different people prefer different things. You can take your hands in and out without breaking the validity of the leak check. But if you undo any of the other zippers, then you do have to redo the leak check, which you're going to do anyways in the vehicle. But taking your hands in and out can just be a little more comfortable, a little more cooling.
That looks like what Woody's doing.
Exactly.
And he's got gloves.
You can see he's got comfort gloves on there, though, which are basically just to help with to absorb some of the sweat and perspiration.
You want to make sure you sign this, nice and legible.
Yeah. There's always no shortage of dragonflies as well out here in Florida, and so that's always one of the other good luck omens that the closeout crew will talk about is having seen a dragonfly come around near the White Room.
Oh, really? That space is open there?
There's a little bit of the black part is kind of like seals up against it, but there is open air inside the crew access arm. And you can see they're getting glasses positioned. So the other thing that the closeout crew is helping them with, they've got some crew personal items like glasses, watches. If they've got the watches they're going to wear on the outside of the suit, this is the kind of time we'd start donning that kind of stuff. if they'd have like wrist mirrors and anything like that, they'll start getting that on now, and as well as once they're inside the capsule.
Well, white room is a term first used during the Gemini era, literally for the description of the color of the room, but it's not really much of a room, right? It's pretty tight.
Yeah, it's more of exactly. It's more of a clean room. You can see they're grabbing name tags there. They'll basically kind of a tradition that started with the first Dragon launch of grabbing some of the closeout crew's name tags, people who haven't either worked on the closeout crew before or haven't had their name tag float in space, and then they'll fly it in Endeavour with them and bring it on back, so they have something to remember the flight by.
That's really neat for the SpaceX team.
Yep. Yeah, it is a cool tradition, and the hardest thing is remembering where you put them all. After 6 months in space, I had a moment of panic when we came back. Like, what did we do with the name tags? We tried to dig. Yeah.
Did we leave them in space? Our mission specialists now having a telephone conversation with their family or loved ones, standing by, getting ready to make their walk down the crew access arm.
The other key thing Nick Hague has to know how to do is dial internationally on that phone, especially with Sultan and Andrey. Yeah.
Oh, right.
It's a government phone. It's not always easy. We had to practice.
Core on countdown.
And there was a dry dress rehearsal.
Exactly.
We remain on schedule.
To hear the call from the core that they're on schedule. So normally, with the crew timeline, like what we train to, is about 2:35 prior to launch is when the crew should be ingressing. So you can see we're right on timeline, and they always build in extra time, of course, for the closer you get to launch, the less extra time you have. But they try to build in time to to repeat things if needed.
So the commander and pilot take their place in the first two seats.
All right, good news. Thanks, Steve.
And here comes Sultan and Andrey.
Dragon
Walking
SpaceX,
down
for
the crew
awareness,
access
we're going to
arm.
be triggering an onboard manual alert. You'll see this temporarily, no corrections required.
So you can hear the core talking to Steve.
SpaceX Dragon talk.
So when they first get in, they just do an initial check just to tell them they're in the seat. There'll be more formal comm checks later, and what you heard the core tell them that they're going to see an annunciation of an alert, but there's nothing required. So they're just giving a heads up so that the crew is not surprised when they see it.
Sultan was pretty pumped as he came down the
he
crew
was,
access arm.
he was moving,
pumping his fists, waving, and gave his flag on his shoulder a tap.
So, yeah, very cool, very exciting.
He's going to go with the gloves. Going to sign it.
Just don't get any Sharpie on the outside.
In Dragon SpaceX, we were actually able to complete that test without triggering the onboard alert, so you can ignore the previous call.
SpaceX Dragon talk. Thanks for the heads up.
So what the ninjas are doing there is making sure that the suit, that's that white outer layer.
SpaceX Dragon, seat 3, comm check.
That's Woody checking in.
Got you loud and clear, Woody. How me?
I have you the same. Good morning, Arthur.
Good morning, and for your awareness, as promised, I am wearing the shirt.
I love it. That makes us so happy.
So Arthur, one of the cores at SpaceX, and usually the crews have pretty good relationships with all the cores and the MDs because we've worked with them so much. So obviously Arthur has either lost some kind of bet or made some kind of bet to have to wear some kind of shirt. Maybe when we see MCCX later, we'll get a peek at what he's got on. You can see Sultan's grabbing some name tags there as well. The practical side of that is it would be great if one person grabbed all the name tags, but they don't fit. Those packs you have on your leg are so tightly packed with checklist pages, some emergency meds if you were to need those, things like that, that you actually distribute those name tags amongst a few different people in the crew so you don't bust the zipper on the pack.
I see.
And that's what so you can see the
Give
crew
him a
support
hand.
exactly. Yep, exactly. There's a little interior pocket there. So like a watch or glasses case or any things like that would be going in there at this point.
Well, there's some motivation by the SpaceX crew to make sure it gets in the right place, right?
Exactly,
Zipped up and
yeah.
nice and tight. You may have noticed something, folks, that's a little different than even when you flew, Raja, and that is that SpaceX is now doing some of the checks and operations in parallel. We heard the communication checks. That's going to reduce the total time by about 27 minutes, but it will still be included in the nominal timeline for troubleshooting. So, for example, when they perform the seat rotation, the core comm check, the suit lead checks, they'll also perform the side hatch inspection. And then we started hearing those comm checks as even the mission specialists are starting to ingress.
Exactly, yeah. So I think every time we do a launch, we learn from it. So as much as we like to think things are routine, we're always learning and trying to improve from those. And in this case, trying to be a little more efficient, look for places where we can combine efforts at the same time.
Do some operations in parallel.
Exactly.
And save some time, because you never know. You might get some FOD on the seal, and you might need some extra time.
It's always nice to be ahead of the timeline versus rushing to catch up, especially when you've got an instantaneous launch window. You want to preserve as much margin as you can. So you can see Sultan and Andrey getting in the vehicle now.
Really got a duck.
Well, the real danger is bumping your helmet visor, because you can see it's easier for the ninjas to get in there. Wearing that suit, and again with the kind of like limited head mobility, it's easy to forget that you've got a giant bulb attached to the top of your head and then bump that visor into something.
I like that shot that SpaceX showed us going into Dragon with the closeout team. Yep. Following right behind the astronauts and the cosmonaut.
See pretty good view of Andrei's armrest there, and you can see the buttons on there. And so you can see that one at the bottom center of your screen with the little white dot. So that's actually a little Velcro button. And so the reason we do that is all those buttons would normally feel the same. So you put a little piece of Velcro on that one, and that way, even through the suit, you can have the tactile feel to know that's the push to talk button. In case you're just like if you were typing on a keyboard, once you find the space bar and you can orient your fingers, that's the same thing for that. Once you find that button, then you know where the other buttons are without having to look down to see them. But you've got a volume, a Vox, which is the sensitivity of your mic, and then a push to talk.
When the crew climbs aboard Dragon, it is referred to as crew ingress. The term ingress is used when crew members are getting into a spacecraft or airlock, while egress means just the opposite, they're exiting. Prior to getting on board, the crew completed a foreign object debris check, or FOD check. That means they basically had to be inspected, and this is what the closeout crew was doing, checking them for substance or debris that isn't supposed to be on them or their suits, which could potentially cause damage to Dragon. And that's also why the crew wears covers on their boots. We didn't see it because the shot was kind of high, but they had them on. They also have their umbilical port on their suits. Those covers get removed. They have covers on top of them before they enter the spacecraft, and you can see them right there where you go in and just plug right into your armrest, right?
Yep, exactly. So that umbilical on their right thigh essentially is that umbilical. And you mentioned the boot covers. All that is a precaution. You can see they're wearing gloves. The closeout crew is essentially a clean room. The capsule is built in a clean room, refurbished in a clean room, and even though it's out on a launch pad, we still have to maintain the integrity of that. It's the last thing you want to do is have something floating around the capsule, especially when it's in microgravity, that can either get ingested, inhale, cause an eye injury, or damage something.
And the foreign object debris, Raja, actually, the prevention of it begins all the way back in Hawthorne. Before the spacecraft leaves SpaceX headquarters, it's carefully controlled all the way through launch day, and then until we will see in just a few, the hatch is closed.
Exactly, yeah. It's the last thing you want is anything loose in a spacecraft, and so it is from the time they build the components, everything is very, very tightly controlled and accounted for.
Well, the closeout crew is buckling them in.
Comm check.
You can see the next comm check there.
Loud and clear. Seat 1, how me?
Got you the same.
The suit techs are there inside the spacecraft with the astronauts just in case they need a hand, and that's exactly what we see happening right now.
Exactly, yep. And it's a mix of crew strapping themselves in, but then generally the closeout crew is going to cinch down the shoulder straps and just make sure you're really secure. It's when you see them moving in the space, you'll see during launch, it doesn't look like they're moving because they are so tightly strapped in, but there's a whole lot happening to the vehicle.
Right. The vibration.
Exactly.
The umbilicals allow the crew to have comms through the suit, air to help keep them cool, as well as nitrox for suit pressurization, which is similar to what scuba divers use.
Yep. And you can see on Woody's, you can see now on his left knee is that satchel I was talking about. So that's like got a kneeboard card on it, but inside that is where the iPads, so they have iPads that have backup procedures on them. You also have some cards you can write on, procedures on the inside, and kind of just a mix of different.
This is seat 4, com check.
It's Andrey's com check, sounds like.
Yep.
Loud and clear, seat 4, how me?
Loud and clear, call. Thank you.
There's a little delay between the audio coming from the astronaut and coming on our broadcast.
Yep. Yeah, you can see Woody's zipping in. So those two layers I was talking about the suit before, you can see there's an orange colored zipper and a white zipper, and that's the orange is the pressure garment zipper and the white is the restraint zipper. That's why there's two colors. And so what he's doing is looking to make sure, and he's showing the closeout crew that he's getting a visual inspection. There's a white tooth on the last piece of the zipper, and that's what he's visually verifying, as he can see that white tooth, and that makes you have a good seal. So that's what they're doing right now. Is basically it's a two-person check. So everything's a checklist, and anything critical you always want to get two sets of eyes on.
And the suit's primary function is to protect the crew in the event of a cabin depressurization, right? Takes
exactly.
Yep. The pressure.
And like you mentioned, the nitrox flows to it to pressurize the suit in the event that happens. So there's a cool shot from the outside.
Yeah, how about that? That's beautiful coming from our Kennedy helicopter.
Yeah, so you can see the black part of the trunk, which is the section below the capsule. That's the solar panels, which is kind of cool to see. Most of the time in manufacturing, that's covered up with these protective panels, so it's not really until it gets out here to the pad that you get to see it like that.
You can see the guy wires that lead up to the top of the tower. Our helicopters are up there performing a important role, and that is security, flying all around the area and making sure that nothing bad would happen from anybody who would want to harm or interfere in any way with this launch. And so we also have assets out in the ocean as well.
You can see over in between Woody and Andrey, you can see the stickers of previous crews. So important to note that one of the cool things about commercial crew and both the Dragon and the Starliner, that the capsules get reused. And so you can see the crews that have flown before have left their sticker behind. So ours is up on Endurance, up in space right now, and the 3 crews that have been in Endeavour have their stickers there.
And there are 4 seats, as we see there, and they are numbered 1 to 4 from right to left when looking at the seats from the hatch. So all the way in the far right will be Andrey Fedyaev. He's in seat 1. Sorry, in the far left, correction. He's the one motioning with his hand right now. In seat 2, moving across to the right, that's Woody Hoburg in the pilot seat. And just to the next astronaut to the right, that's Stephen Bowen, the commander, in seat 3. And then at the far right is Sultan Alneyadi. He's in seat 4.
All right, kind of giving some last-minute handshakes here. Closeout crew doing some fist bumps. At some point, they'll probably get a photo, is my guess.
You become close with the closeout.
You do, yeah. Like I said, you know these people. Like it's actually really cool. By the time you're at the end of the sim campaign, you can tell just by the tone of someone's voice. Before you even hear what the problem is or what the thing is in a sim, you know, okay, this is good or bad, just by the way they sound.
Well, we're ready for some social questions. We mentioned at the top of the show that we want to take your questions throughout this show, and while we've got a little moment here, while the astronauts and cosmonaut are settled into their seats inside the Dragon, we want to check in and take a question. This comes from Sotex Rangerman. What time does the crew wake up for this late night launch?
So actually, to them it seems like the day, even though it's dark out, because we do a thing called sleep shifting. So once they set the launch time, then the entire schedule, even as far back as when they were in quarantine, when they're at Johnson Space Center, they start to change the schedule of the crew to shift their circadian rhythm. And it's a blend of the launch time, but the other thing is we don't completely shift it because they also need to, when they get to the space station, we run on GMT or Zulu time. And so there's the flight docs, we've got a long history of working with folks who understand sleep patterns to find out basically what is the optimum blend between launch time and when you show up to the space station. You don't want to have to then shift your body again. So we kind of pick something in between. So it varies depending on that, is I guess the answer to that question. So it could be maybe 5-6 hours prior, 8 hours prior, and it has to do with making that right compromise of crew awake time versus trying to get their body clocks on the right thing. But even in crew quarters, for example, all the rooms have different switches for banks of light, and so you can have like low light or like full bright light and sort of try to sync your body to that. But my guess is today, probably like 6-ish hours prior, they were up. I think most people that were supporting, including us, took a nap this afternoon. So I think the crew did the same, and then woke up probably about 6 hours prior to start the prep.
And your flight doctors help with this, right? Because this is something that's very calculated
exactly.
in terms of
Yep.
shifting your
and they
sleep
absolutely
schedule.
do. Yep. And so they actually build a whole, that's built into the whole plan. And so even like at the wet dress and the lead up to this, that is all accounted for. And yeah, every because you're doing training events still, you're getting briefs on the weather, on the vehicle status, and all that is timed to make sure it is synced with whatever the sleep shift is.
And SpaceX Dragon crew is ready for comm checks.
SpaceX copies. Stand by for umbilical comm check.
All right, so they're running a little ahead, it looks like. So the crew's got display, giving us some waves. There's a procedure that they're running called, so SpaceX procedures are a number with a dot and something. So this would be 4.100, and the procedures are on their displays. And so usually they'll have one display that's showing the timeline and then another display with this procedure up. So they just talked about the fact that they're ready to do comm checks. And so there's going to be a series of checks here. We talked earlier, Daryl, about how there's different relays. One's to the umbilical, which is the physical connection between the Dragon, the launch pad, and the ground. There's a
SpaceX Commander comm check.
Commander, have you loud and clear?
And that's Arthur the Corey here talking to him.
And Commander has you loud and clear as well.
That's the crew operation.
SpaceX pilot, we had you loud and clear.
Resource engineer.
Pilot, loud and clear.
SpaceX MS1 comm check.
MS1, loud and clear.
SpaceX, this is MS2. Do you read me?
MS2, loud and clear. Umbilical comm check complete. Report when ready for seat rotation.
So there you heard the call for the seat rotation. So we're seeing the astronauts and the cosmonaut for the last time with that camera inside the spacecraft before that camera has to pull out.
And SpaceX Dragon crew is ready for seat rotation.
And those seats articulate up so they can look at that display that is at the top of the screen. That's where the action is.
Exactly, yeah. You'll see the seats rotate for both launch and landings. So
SpaceX copies Dragon. Will report when initiating.
Yeah, so that it's like this to make it easier to get.
Initiating seat rotation.
You'll start to move. Make it easier to get in and out for both the people and the cargo, but then you rotate the seats for launch and landing so that the G-forces are more through your chest and not in like a more odd. You don't want to be like in a
pulling it down from your
weird,
head.
yeah,
let's say,
exactly.
like the blood
It
down
makes
to
it
your feet.
exactly. So this makes it much more easy to sustain the G's when it's pushing through your chest, kind of like someone sitting on your chest, as opposed to pulling it down towards your feet. And you can see the cargo underneath there.
There they go. Rotating, articulating, I should say, up into that flight position. And they'll be able to look at their screen and monitor the systems as Dragon is prepared for flight along with the Falcon 9. Neat shot there.
Yep. So you can see it's not just people going up to the space station, a whole bunch of stuff getting hauled up there as well.
That's right.
Dragon SpaceX, seats are in the launch position.
SpaceX Dragon copies.
So the umbilical comm checks were all the way around, good to go.
Yep. The next big thing for the crew will likely be suit leak checks, but that's probably a little ways off. In the meantime, what they're probably doing in between themselves is adjusting those Vox settings, and like I mentioned, that's the sensitivity of the mic, and so you're kind of tuning it so that you're not hearing background noise, but that you can hear each other talk. And
Dragon SpaceX, you are go for Section 2 suit leak check preparation.
And we've got Section 2 suit leak check preparation in work.
So Steve mentioned Section 2, that was the procedure I was talking about before, so they're doing it on the screens. You'll see them running through the steps there. Steve's probably telling them to lower their visors, which is why they just did that. He's reviewing the steps that are in the procedure. Essentially, when they're doing this, they're going to kind of stay still and let the suit the nitrox start to flow, it's going to pressurize the suit. You'll probably see them tuck their arms in. You'll see the suit inflate a bit. You'll probably see the helmet move up again, move up, and that's why I mentioned before why it has to be tight so that they can still see out of it.
Got the visors closed as well.
Yep, they're tightening the straps down, and then they're going to be looking at, so Steve and Woody, and actually all of them, but there's displays right in front of them. They're going to show them the suit delta pressure, and they're making sure that the suit can hold the pressure, that there's no leaks.
Andrei's got his hands in position now, that you mentioned was coming up.
Yeah. And you'll see after this leak check, you'll see they will never touch their zippers again. The only thing they'll do is open and close the visors, but after this leak check, that's the last time they'll mess with any zippers.
Once you know they're good to go, leave them alone.
Exactly, yep.
All right, SpaceX Dragon tear is complete. We are ready for leak checks.
T-minus 2 hours and 24 minutes until liftoff.
SpaceX copies. You are go for Section 3, suit leak check.
And we got Section 3 suit leak check in work.
So you heard Steve first mention that the tear was complete. So just like if you're weighing food when you're cooking it, you tear it, like with the dish, they tear the suits to zeroize it, and then they start the leak check. So that way you've basically taken out any bias in the suit pressure meetings, and now they're just going through it. You'll know they're about to do it when you see Woody and Steve's hands come down and get still, and then they'll kind of all just sit there.
You were the commander for Crew 3. What's your role in this moment?
So my analogy that I like to use is kind of like a professional coach of a team, where you're not really, if you're an NBA coach or an NFL or Major League Baseball coach, you're not teaching people how to play. You're just trying to get them to work together in the most efficient way. And that's the same thing. Everyone in our office is highly trained. I don't need to tell anyone how to do their job, but more it's a matter of like, okay, for this emergency, Steve might say, okay, in the case of a depress, then Woody, you're doing this, Sultan, you're doing this, Andrey, you're doing that, and the important thing is iterating on that. So you have a sim, you see how that goes, and even if it went great, maybe change it the next time to see, like, oh, that either went better or it validates that we had the right approach. So it's kind of working with the training team to figure out the best, we call it CRM, or crew resource management. What is the optimum way to use the crew skills in a variety of environments? And sometimes maybe having the same approach, so having like a buddy system maybe works, but maybe there's a balance of like, do you want to keep it simple, or maybe there's a certain reason to do something, like for example, depending on how good, like my Russian wasn't really great, right? So so if we had a Russian crew member, Tom probably would have sat next to that person. We would have figured that out, or figured out certain emergencies. So Woody's a lot smarter than me, and Steve's been speaking Russian a lot longer, so I'm sure they didn't have that. I'm sure they didn't have that concern, but things like that. So it's just trying to figure out how to best optimize the skill set of the crew. And you can see
look like
their pressure. Yeah, you can see that's why Woody's hands look like a mummy there, just sticking out.
Yeah.
And you can see their knees have gotten much puffier. You can see Andrei's head, like the helmet now is, you can still see his nose and his eyes, but it's risen up. You can see how it's extended there in his neck. And that's why it's so important to be fully strapped in, because if you weren't fully strapped in the suit, you would turn in, like, you'd basically just puff up and wouldn't be able to move your arms and legs. So these are not like what we call the EMUs. These are not meant to go EVA or do spacewalks, these kind of suits. These are called IV suits, meant for in the vehicle. And as you mentioned, to protect you from a fire or a depress, but not to go outside and actually move around.
And we just heard from Johnson Space Center that we have 4 passing leak checks.
Excellent. You can see they're deflating. You can see actually the suit getting smaller on them.
Yeah, see it depressing.
SpaceX Dragon, we have nominal suit leak checks for all suits.
Next, you'll see they pop their visors up shortly.
SpaceX copies and concurs good suit leak checks. Closeout team will now perform final closeout steps and exit capsule. Proceed to Section 4 for side hatch closure, and report when ready to close side hatch. Also, stand by for ground station comm checks.
All right, we'll move on to Section 4 for side hatch closure, and we'll report when we're ready for side hatch closure.
We've been taking social questions, and we appreciate you bringing them in, and Raja's been giving us some excellent insights. We want to take another question while the closeout crew inspects the seal around the hatch. Jump on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch at #AskNASA to get your question in. Our question comes from Professor
SpaceX
Marbles.
Dragon crew is ready for side hatch closure.
So cool to hear about the dragonflies as a good sign. Raja mentioned that a little bit earlier, that a dragonfly, when seen inside the White Room, was a good luck sign. What other things are regarded as good luck?
Yeah, and I should caveat that's on dry dress, because as you mentioned, it's a clean room now. Yes, so seeing a dragonfly now would be bad, because that means there's bugs.
That could be fun.
Yeah, that means there's bugs inside the. Yeah, so I should have made that more clear before. Yes, during dress rehearsal. Yes. Let's see other things. Let me think about that. I think slapping. So Steve probably had an STS or shuttle patch on the outside of the thing. So slapping your patch on the way into the AQF facility is like that's a thing,
luck?
right?
Okay.
Yep.
I saw Sultan give his.
Yep. Yeah. That's a. I'm trying to think of other ones. On the way out of crew quarters, typically the chief of the astronaut office, there'll be some kind of card game. It changes from crew to crew, but there's something they'll do with the chief of the astronaut office right before they leave the suit room. And honestly, I think no one remembers if you're supposed to win or lose. I think it depends.
No, I think you played it.
I did. Well, yes. Well, there was this debate, like, are you supposed to? So one argument is you're supposed to lose, because then you've gotten rid of all your bad luck.
Leave the bad luck on the ground.
Exactly. The other one is you're supposed to win, because then you feel good as the crew. So I don't know what the right answer is. We actually played a little mini game of shuffleboard. We kind of
shuffleboard
based on we had a little tradition when we were in training of playing little mini shuffleboard with not the shuffleboard like the huge stick shuffleboard. That's a little one. Yeah.
Okay.
So that was what actually we elected to do, and then we did pick do a game of war in terms of like picking who had the high card, but I honestly can't remember if I won or lost, because we decided we weren't sure which it was supposed to be. So I'm not sure what Joe elected to do.
Well, whatever it was, it worked out great.
Exactly. Yeah, we should have written that down, I guess.
Well, thank you, Professor Marbles, who, by the way, is one of our social participants here at the Kennedy Space Center, with a number of NASA social participants being hosted by the Kennedy Space Center. We reach out and invite folks who are leaders in the social space to come out and visit the Kennedy Space Center for a launch. They're all here, ready to watch their launch, many of them for the first time. Like you.
Yep, exactly.
Dragon SpaceX closeout team is taking final steps in preparation to close the side hatch. Stand by for transition to pad hatch closed. Ensure all items remain secure from now through launch.
SpaceX Dragon copies.
And now we're at hatch close.
Yep, and so you heard that call from the core. So there's nothing the crew's actually doing in terms of the actual hatch closing. You can see they have those more powerful lights out. They're monitoring. The key thing he told them was not. So basically, up to this point, they could be moving things out of their satchels, maybe moving their iPads around. But from this point out, you don't want to do that, because if something falls off your leg, you lose a pen. Now you've got a piece of FOD in the capsule. So basically, they're no longer going to mess with anything other than the displays and their armrests. Nothing, no taking pencils out or doing like that. So they are probably doing the last bit of configuration. You saw those like kneeboard cards that they had on their legs, like making sure those are velcroed on, that they have access to the pen or pencil they want to be able to write down notes with, and getting all that done.
So as we watch this, we're going to split the screen so we can maintain our visual of the closeout crew inspecting the hatch before they close it. But we also want to look back to a little history and a recent honor that happened for a couple of our astronauts. Today, we are launching American astronauts on American rockets from American soil.
It is my great honor to award you both the Congressional Space Medal of Honor.
In January, Vice President Kamala Harris spoke to a packed room at the White House about the dedication of NASA astronauts Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken.
Bob and Doug represent the best of our nation. There's no question about it.
NASA selected both men to be astronauts for the Space Shuttle program in 2000. But when the shuttle program ended 11 years later, Doug and Bob's work did not. NASA collaborated with the private sector to build the next generation of spacecraft.
Every part of the capsule, from flight controls and emergency procedures to computer displays and cockpit layout, all of that shaped by Bob and Doug's decades of know-how.
And in May of 2020, the SpaceX Crew Dragon was ready to soar.
Bob and Doug returned to the Kennedy Space Center. They suited up, they waved to their families, and they rode an elevator up nearly 20 stories. They strapped in to their seats and waited as the tanks beneath them filled with tens of thousands of gallons of fuel. And then
3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Go NASA, go SpaceX, Godspeed, Bob and Doug.
Demo 2 was the first crewed flight for NASA's Commercial Crew program, ushering in a new era of human spaceflight. And now, the names Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken have been added to an elite list. Prior to this ceremony, the Congressional Space Medal of Honor had only been given to 28 people, astronauts like Neil Armstrong and John Glenn.
We're following in their footsteps, and so it's just an incredible honor.
It was humbling to be a part of the mission. We got to be the smiling faces on the pointy end of a rocket ship.
Because of their bravery, missions like Crew-6 are happening today.
Bob and Doug together have written the first page of a new chapter in the history of American space flight.
Bob and Doug dedicated their careers to space flight. What an honor, Raja.
Yeah, it was so cool. I got the honor to work with them as we approached Demo 2, and the Vice President couldn't have said it better. They have set the stage for a whole new era of space flight, and we are seeing it. That we, whether it's the Dragon, the Starliner, they were in on the ground floor doing all that, and exactly like she said, their influence is all over this vehicle, and the way they worked with SpaceX to help design it, we are all benefiting that. We continue to benefit from it today, and so actually more than a few times in training, like why is it like this? Like, oh, Bob and Doug, like that makes sense.
How about that?
Yeah. So it was very cool and very well deserved, and the office, NASA, the country is in such a better place because of the work they did.
Well said, Raja. And while we're talking about honors and the office of the president, I want to mention that Raja was nominated by the President of the United States for the appointment to the grade of Air Force Brigadier General. Still needs to be confirmed by the Senate, right?
Yep.
But the Senate, of course, approves all senior civilian and military appointments. But congratulations
Thanks very much,
on getting that nomination.
Yeah, my wife and I are super honored and humbled to be able to continue serving in the next grades. But yeah, we're very honored and special to be able to do that here at NASA.
Oh, very good. I don't have to call you General yet.
Definitely not. Please don't. Yeah.
Okay, Colonel.
Not even that. How about just Raja?
Okay, will do. Let's check in now with Courtney Beasley at the Johnson Space Center for an update in Houston, Texas. Hey, Courtney.
Hey, Daryl, thanks. As we said earlier, the team here in Mission Control Houston is actively monitoring the International Space Station as they await Dragon's arrival. The crew aboard the station is currently in a sleep period, and they are scheduled to wake up at midnight Central Time. They have completed a number of tasks to prepare the station for Crew-6, like setting up tools to monitor Dragon's arrival and prepping the sleep stations for new residents. Many of their clothes and other belongings launched on a previous cargo resupply mission. Back here in Houston, Flight Director Mike Lammers and his team are in constant communication with the SpaceX mission director for Crew-6's launch to the space station. Once we get to integrated operations, the NASA flight director will be conducting a series of go, no-go polls at the predetermined checkpoints for Dragon's approach. For now, we'll continue to follow along from here in Mission Control Houston, and I'll send it back to the team over at Kennedy. Over to you, Jasmine.
Thanks so much, Courtney. Back at Kennedy here, joining us now is NASA Recovery Director Brian Barry. Thanks for being here.
Of course, thank you.
Of course. So, Brian, we understand that you are the NASA Recovery Director for Crew-5, but you've actually done a lot of things for human spaceflight. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. Yeah, that's right. So I started my career as a flight controller for the ISS program. My team was responsible for maintenance on the space station. So I had the opportunity to work directly with the astronauts, train them on tools and repair procedures, so that was a lot of fun and something I never thought I would do when I was studying to be an engineer. After that, I moved over to the safety team, and I was our safety rep for the Commercial Crew Program safety panel, so that was my first exposure to CCP, and I would go review the hazard reports for Dragon and Starliner. That was a pretty neat experience also because I was able to work with Bob and Doug prior to Demo 2 and just kind of work with them on the hazard reports and get their perspective on the risk and the mission overall. After that, in 2020, I came out to Commercial Crew and I work for them directly now, and I've been doing launch and recovery operations since then. On the launch team, my role is to lead the rescue effort if we need to. If there's a pad emergency egress or a pad abort, the launch rescue director calls in the rescue forces. So that's what I did for Crew 5 launch last year. And then as the recovery director, I lead the NASA portion of the team that goes out on the ship with SpaceX. We bring out our flight surgeons and we check out the crew and we load them up on the helicopter and get them back home.
Right, so you've worn a lot of hats for the Commercial Crew program. How did your work as a flight controller in Houston prepare you to be a NASA recovery director?
Well, in Houston, working the ISS operations, you see day in and day out in the control center, you get the full feel of the 6-month mission, so you understand what the crew is going through for that long of a mission. And I think I just kind of bring that crew perspective of the ISS side to the CCP program, and so when it's time to bring the crew home, we know we owe them a smooth and speedy recovery, so that's our priority and our objective.
Right. Brian, it's great that you have that personal relationship with them. What challenges do you and the recovery team have to be prepared for?
Well, the biggest challenge for recovery for Dragon and landing site where the winds are low and the waves are low. So SpaceX has several landing sites around the state of Florida that we can look at and choose the best weather. Beyond that, we start looking at things like contingencies if the crew is injured, and we've got helicopters on standby for a medevac if we need to. And then, there's also just built-in redundancy on the ship and throughout the vehicle. So, but yeah, weather is definitely the biggest challenge for landing.
Right. No, weather is a huge challenge in Florida for a lot of things. And after Crew 5 returns, Brian, you're going to transition to a new role in the Commercial Crew program, mission manager for Crew 8. Can you tell us how you're preparing for that?
Sure. So as a mission manager, it's more of a high-level review.
Just an update. We were doing some final
readiness
inspections
job for the entire mission, not just launch or landing. And that role begins 18 months out. So for Crew 8, which launches a year from now, we've already begun those meetings with SpaceX. And so it's pretty exciting to be a part of that early in the mission. And yeah, I'm just honored and proud to do that for the program.
Of course. Well, congratulations, Brian. So glad to have you here tonight.
Thanks, Jasmine.
Daryl, back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Jasmine. And if you're just joining us, we are currently 2 hours and 7 minutes until liftoff of Crew-6, launching as part of NASA's, as we just heard so well, Commander Stephen Bowen, pilot Woody Hoburg, and mission specialist Sultan Alneyadi and Andrey Fedyaev are strapped into the seats behind that capsule right there inside Dragon Endeavour. And here's an interesting note about Endeavour. The SpaceX fleet leader in number of flights to and from the station is Endeavour.
That's true, yeah. So go ahead.
Well,
so,
I was just going to say.
I got to watch Bob and Doug go in. And
that's right.
Yeah, it's cool that we are proving out that you get to reuse these vehicles. It's not just a dream. We're actually doing it.
And they're certified now for 5 flights, which is a human certification that is done in partnership with the Commercial Crew program. The 3 previous flights for this Dragon was, as you mentioned, the historic first flight called Demo 2, then Crew 2, and then Axiom Mission 1, which you were on station, right?
We were,
when
yeah.
Axiom
When
came
Axiom
aboard.
They docked to what's called the Zenith port. So yeah, we were there, which is pretty historic to have the first private astronauts from U.S. soil come up to the space station. It was awesome.
And these astronauts today, Raja, that could happen for them as well if Axiom 2 goes up within their increment, right?
Exactly, yep. And so that's exactly the plan. And Axiom 2's in training. I think they publicly released the names not too long ago. So you can see that online. But yeah, so they do some training at Johnson Space Center, and because exactly that, if they're on orbit on time, they'd be interacting with Crew-6.
And we're also going to take some social media questions, and we've been taking them along the way. Raja's been doing a great job answering those. So let's take a question now as the closeout crew gets that hatch closed. Seth Milborn, 99, asks, how does the docking process work?
All right, well, Seth, first off, I like the 99 because I'm a class of 99 grad from the Academy, so I was going to throw out a shout to the 99ers out there. But, so how does the docking process work? So we have what's called an instantaneous launch window, and the reason is because you're trying to align the orbit that we're going to put the Dragon into with the orbit of the space station. And there's different windows every day, but we choose that so that we're trying to, it's a combination of optimizing the prop you need to use, the propellant, and the timing. So you could go faster to the space station, you could go slower. It depends on the propellant, but we have to build in all these contingencies. So
Dragon, SpaceX, ComCheck over ground station.
And I'll pause for just a second for the comm checks, and I'll come back to your answers.
SpaceX Dragon, have you line clear over the ground station?
Core, loud and clear. Ground station ComCheck complete. Stand by for TDRS ComChecks.
And this is what we talked about earlier, Daryl, that there's going to be a series of comm checks checking the different connections.
The ground station comm check is complete now.
Next
I
will
believe
be
TDRS is next.
Next will be TDRS. In the meantime, Seth, I'll keep talking until they talk again. So once you're in orbit, then you start in a lower orbit than the space station. And when you're in a lower orbit, generally for mostly circular orbits, you're moving faster relative to the station. So you actually start to catch up to the space station. And then you do a series of what's called phasing burns to slowly boost yourself very close to the space station. And once you get inside what's called the keep out sphere, that's when Houston...
Dragon, SpaceX, ComCheck.
And SpaceX Dragon, have you loud and clear?
Core, loud and clear. TDRS ComCheck complete. Stand by for ComChecks with DC, MD, and LD in the launch configuration.
Dragon DC on countdown 1, ComCheck.
And DC Dragon, have you loud and clear on countdown 1?
DC loud and clear, stand by for ComChecks with MD.
Dragon, MD on countdown 1, ComCheck.
MD Dragon, have you loud and clear on countdown 1?
MD loud and clear, stand by for ComCheck over Dragon to ground. Dragon, MD on Dragon to ground, ComCheck.
MD Dragon, have you loud and clear over Dragon to ground.
MD loud and clear, stand by for ComChecks with LD.
Dragon, LD on countdown 1, ComCheck.
LD Dragon, have you loud and clear on countdown 1.
LD, loud and clear, stand by for ComCheck over Dragon to ground. Dragon, LD on Dragon to ground, ComCheck.
LD Dragon, have you loud and clear over Dragon to ground.
LD, loud and clear.
Dragon, SpaceX with that launch configuration, ComChecks are now complete.
SpaceX Dragon copies.
And so those comm checks, like we talked about, Daryl, were different people, different loops, and just making sure that all the key folks can get in contact with the crew if they need to, since there's a bunch of, if you can imagine, lots and lots of different comm loops on the ground with different people talking on different ones. So you want to make sure that they're
Dragon,
connected.
SpaceX, we are going to commence
And,
health checks for the launch escape system. Expect momentary flight computer state change, followed by a transition back to pad hatch closed.
All right, so that flight state change.
SpaceX Dragon, we'll be watching, thanks.
Yep, so the flight computer state he's talking about, so on the displays, in the bottom center of the displays, it tells you what state the flight computer is in. So right now it says hatch open, and the way that they know for sure that it's closed isn't just the door being closed, it's actually the flight computer state doing that, and that then allows them to initiate further commands. And then cleaning up your answer on the docking. So we talked about it's catching up to the space station, and then you do what's called phasing burns to get closer to the space station. Once you get in basically what we call the keep out sphere, either along the velocity vector from below it, depending on what docking axis you're on, then you join up with the space station, and you'll see that tomorrow actually. When if you tune back on NASA TV, they'll show the docking.
Indeed we will, right around 3 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. They've got about a 24 to 25 hour transit from launch to dock. We want to take a pause now, and we'll keep monitoring the progress inside Dragon with the 3 astronauts and 1 cosmonaut. But in the meantime, we also want to check in with a special guest. Jasmine Hopkins, take it away.
Thanks so much, Daryl. Joining us now on the balcony of OSB-2 is Kurt Costello, the ISS Chief Scientist. Good evening, Kurt.
Good evening, Jasmine.
We are so glad to have you here tonight. After Crew-6 launches, they'll become part of the Expedition 69 crew, and their time will be packed with spacewalks, a lot of science. So can you unpack some of that for us?
Yeah, they'll be there during a really dynamic portion of our year. We're going to have the cargo mission SpaceX 27 launch, the NG-19 mission launch, and then crewed missions with the Boeing CFT mission and then AX-2 later in their increment. So there is a ton of research going on. A lot of it's going to be dedicated to human research. And one of those investigations comes from ESA, and it's our immunity assay investigation, where we're trying to find out how spaceflight impacts the immune system of the crew members.
Right, Kurt. As you said, I mean, this time is going to be packed with a lot of science, a 6-month science mission for them. One of the experiments that's been longstanding is called tissue chips. Can you tell us more about that first initiative with the National Institutes of Health?
Yeah, this is actually the second in a series of the NIH NCATs, which stands for National Center for Advancing Translational Science. And what we're looking at are tissue chips, which are sets of cells and tissues that go into the ISS and are grown out. And this set of experiments from the ISS National Lab is really set to look at treatments for those tissues. So we'll be having 2 investigations go on board. The first is called Cardinal Heart 2.0. And they'll be looking at treatments that could help deal with cardiac stressors on orbit. And the other one is called Engineered Heart Tissues 2.0. And this one is really interesting. They've got those same heart tissues growing, but this time they're attached to a magnet. And the magnet tells us how hard that heart tissue beats and contracts on orbit. So these living heart cells are going to be able to tell us, 1, how hard they're working in the presence of the spaceflight environment, and then treatments are going to be applied to them so we can understand if that can help with those stressors.
Wow, it's nice to hear that, some of the research we're doing on station could benefit our health here on Earth as well. There's also a combustion experiment called SOFI Mist. Can you tell us about that as well?
Sure. SOFI Mist is a combustion experiment for solids. SOFI stands for solids in flight extinction. So ignition and extinction. And what we're looking at are how solid materials burn under different atmospheric pressures and different concentrations of oxygen. The reason for this is our exploration vehicles have different atmospheres, and we want to understand how solids burn in space and how they can be extinguished efficiently. So we want to be able to put out any fires that ever occur in a cabin.
Right, that's very important. ISS Chief Scientist Kurt Costello, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Daryl, back to you.
Thank you, Jasmine and Kurt. And I thought it was interesting. He was talking about that SOFI experiment and burning materials in space. You worked on some experiments yourself in which you burn things.
Yeah, so we
burning things in space, Roger?
Yeah, well, you got to be really careful.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah, so when you're up there as part of Expedition 66, we did several experiments with the combustion chamber, and it is a piece of engineering. So getting to work on it, install new materials. But the really cool thing, so Kirk mentioned part of it, like there's the one piece is making sure there's not fires. The other thing we're really interested in is there's some work going on like cold flames, and so flames on the Earth because of the gravity field, you have the hot part, and then you see it actually go up. And Jenny Seide in our class is a combustion engineer, so there's some really fascinating things. But in microgravity, it's a ball of flame, and so some really interesting research is some cold combustion engine type technology where you could reduce greenhouse gas emissions because of the way the flame burns. So that is the kind of fundamental science we're doing. Combustion research up there.
Is this because it's more of an efficient burn?
Well, it burns different. Exactly. You can have a cooler flame as it burns out instead of having this sort of wasted stuff as it goes literally.
How about that?
Yeah, some just amazing things that
Dragon
fall out
SpaceX
of
good side hatch leak check.
That fall out of research we never expected.
That's cool.
SpaceX Dragon copies. That's good news.
And you just heard the Corps talk about the leak check pass.
We covered that, Steve, and we also have a post-ingress briefing when you're ready to copy.
Yeah, that's great news.
We are ready to copy the post-ingress briefing.
All right. We have no updates on weather from the previous briefing, and Dragon and Falcon are tracking no issues for launch. We're looking good here. The NASA team, for your awareness, is tracking a possible conjunction for ISS in about 22 hours and is considering performing a PDAM if required. We are still go for launch, regardless of if the PDAM will be required. If we do take that avoidance maneuver, or if ISS takes that avoidance maneuver, they may attempt to perform it prior to the Dragon boost burn, which helps to minimize impacts to our rendezvous timeline. We will come back after launch with more information as the joint teams evaluate if the PDAM is required, as well as if there are any updates to your mission timeline. I'll copy.
And SpaceX Dragon, we copy all. Thank you for the heads up on the PDAM, and we'll be waiting for those words after we get to orbit.
So a possible conjunction.
Right, conjunction is a fancy term for hitting something, running into it.
For the space station,
right?
not
For the Dragon. So as you heard, there's still go for launch, and kind of ties into this question we had from social media before about docking. I mentioned there's a timeline, and you heard the
That's
Corps
a
talk.
good read back, Dragon. And at this time, we'll step into comm checks with Falcon 9 operators. Please report when you're ready.
All right, SpaceX Dragon, we're ready for comm checks with the Falcon 9 operators.
So before they did the comm checks with the SpaceX, the Dragon team, now this is the rocket.
CE on countdown 1, initiating RE comm checks. GNC is first.
So this is the launch
Dragon,
team.
GNC on countdown 1, comm check.
And GNC Dragon, have you loud and clear on countdown 1.
GNC loud and clear. Stand by for comm check by the propulsion engineer.
Dragon, prop on countdown 1, comm check.
And prop, Dragon, have you loud and clear on countdown 1.
Prop, loud and clear. Stand by for comm check with the avionics engineer.
Dragon Avionics on countdown 1, comm check.
Avionics Dragon, have you loud and clear on countdown 1.
Avionics loud and clear. Stand by for comm check by the ground segment engineer.
Dragon, ground segment on countdown 1, comm check.
And ground Dragon, have you loud and clear on countdown 1.
Ground segment, loud and clear. Stand by for comm check by launch control.
Dragon, launch control on countdown 1, comm check.
Launch control, Dragon, have you loud and clear on countdown 1.
Launch control, loud and clear. Stand by for comm check by the chief engineer. Dragon, CE on countdown 1, comm check.
CE Dragon, have you loud and clear on countdown 1.
CE, loud and clear. This completes the F9 responsible engineer comm checks.
If there was any kind of problem with the rocket, a subsystem of the rocket, you'd want that person to be able to talk directly to the crew. So there's making sure that comm channel is there. Going back to the PDAM, you mentioned that stands for a debris avoidance maneuver, and so Space Force is actually constantly watching all the things in orbit, and then if there is any chance that we think someone will get close to the ISS, they notify Houston. We have a thing called the topo, which is the position that they analyze orbital trajectories, and there's different levels of risk, so they always will want to make sure that we are very conservative with crew safety and the vehicle safety, and so as you heard them talking about, it's not going to affect the launch decision. What it will affect is how they do the burns to get to the space station, because if the space station does a burn to maneuver, then that will mean the target that the Dragon was going towards will shift, and so they'll work that out over the next 20 hours.
You mentioned the topo. That's the trajectory operations officer, and hear from colleagues at Johnson Space Center that they're trending in the right direction. So things
Gotcha.
are looking good in terms of that possible conjunction in 22 hours for the International Space Station.
I'd say it's pretty normal. At least once a week we hear about one when you're on the space station. Most of them resolve themselves. Very rarely do you actually have to maneuver the station. But like I said, we have this huge protective bubble around the space station, and anything that possibly could go in there, we always want to investigate. So this is probably just the beginning of that investigation, and then as we learn more about it, it's probably not going to be a problem, but we always are wanting to make sure we're very conservative with the crew.
Make sure
and the
you're
vehicle.
ready in case
Exactly.
it's not. All right,
Yep.
very good. Well, now we want to throw it over to Jasmine, who is with NASA Administrator Bill Nelson.
So much, Daryl. Yes, right now we're honored to be joined by NASA Administrator Bill Nelson as well as astronaut Reed Wiseman. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Well, it's always a treat when we start launching and going into the heavens.
Exactly. We're always happy to have you back here, Administrator Nelson. So first question for you. International partnership is the lifeblood of the commercial crew program. We have the second time we have a Roscosmos cosmonaut on board, but this is the first time we have a UAE astronaut on board. Can you talk about those international partnerships?
You know, as we go back to the moon after 50 years, it's not just the U.S. government. It's now an international mission, and it's a public-private partnership as we go back to the moon and then on to Mars. In this particular case, going to commercial crew to the International Space Station, it's very much both of those as well. Public-private partnership with SpaceX, and then international crew. So much so that you've got our partners ever since we built the space station, the Russians. We're now sending an American astronaut on the Soyuz, and they are sending a Russian cosmonaut on Dragon. And we will have many other nationalities going as well.
Right, we go farther if we go together. Reed, question for you. We right now are in low Earth orbit on the International Space Station. That is paving the way for deep space. Can you tell us about that?
I think the International Space Station, we've had crew on there since the year 2000. We don't even think about it anymore, right? So we have 7 folks up there right now, and they've been orbiting the Earth. They just flew over us here about a half an hour ago, and they're going to come back around. But the thing that really blows your mind up there is all of the environmental control, life support systems that we have, how much we're recycling water, all the science that we're conducting, and we really have learned how to operate off of our planet. So we can do that now 250 miles up, so it's time to start doing that 250,000 miles away at the moon, and then heading on to Mars.
Right, we're very exciting. Great time to be at NASA. We actually polled the NASA workforce, and they want to know from both of you, what missions are you most looking forward to in 2023? A very exciting time for us.
All of them.
Good answer, good answer.
And by the way, it's not just space. We're going to fly the X-57 all-electric airplane, the X-59 supersonic, low sonic boom airplane, and then our climate. We are putting up all kinds of instruments that are measuring very specifically what's happening to the Earth.
Right, that's really important for us to know what's going on here on the planet. Reed, would you like to add anything?
I have to add that we're standing here at Cape Canaveral. We got 4 of our friends behind us, so I'm rooting for Crew-6 today.
Absolutely, go Crew-6. Thank you both for being here tonight. Daryl, back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Jasmine. And although going into space is not child's play, every Dragon astronaut crew brings, every Dragon astronaut I should say, they bring a stuffed toy with them. And its purpose, when the toy starts floating, the strapped-in crew has confirmation they've reached microgravity. And what is this called? This is called a zero-G indicator. It's a long-standing tradition, and there's been 7 on Dragon so far. There's 1 in this Dragon as well. Starting with this guy. It all began with Plush Earth. Who can forget him floating around by himself in the first uncrewed flight in 2017 called Demo 1. That was followed up by a sequin bedazzled dinosaur named Tremor, picked out by Bob Benken's son Theo and crewmate Doug Hurley's son Jack. Crew 1 took a toy Baby Yoda with them to show the first 4-person crew when they reached space. But since then, it's been all stuffed animals. A penguin for Crew 2, and then, of course, Raj's flight, a turtle for Crew 3,
Good old
There's
Fowl,
Caleb Aaron, yeah. And then a turtle and a chimp for Crew 4. For the last mission, though, on Crew 5, they unveiled the first humanoid, the Albert Einstein Little Thinker plush doll. And so that begs the question, what is Crew 6's 0G? We'll find out later. But you had the turtle, and there's a special reason for that.
It is, yeah. So our class of 2017, we're called the Turtles, which, so the previous class always names the next class. And I think a lot of people thought Turtles was supposed to be an insult because it's slow, but that's actually quite the opposite. The reason is when the vice president announced our class, he said that if you ever see a turtle on a fence post, you know the turtle didn't get there by itself. And so we take it as quite a nod to the people that got us to where we're at, which is very true, that none of us would be where we're at without our families, the flight controllers, the trainers that got us there. And so we actually love the term turtle and don't take it as an insult at all. But yeah, we had every crew takes a while to develop theirs. With ours, actually our turtle was named Fowl, which is German for turtle, since Matthias was our German crewmate, and it was actually a rainbow turtle, a peacock turtle, which is because Tom was class the peacock. So it was a nod to everyone on the crew.
You merged that in
We
there.
did,
That
yep.
was nice. All right, as they seal up, get the final, they've sealed the hatch, but now they're doing some final checks there with the crew. We want to check in back with Mission Control in Houston and our own Courtney Beasley. Courtney?
Thanks, Daryl. When Crew 6 arrives at the space station tomorrow morning, they will officially become Expedition 68 flight engineers. Once on board, they'll do something known as a direct handover, basically saying that Crew 5 and Crew 6 will be aboard the space station all together until Crew 5 comes home. Crew 5 will be able to give Crew 6 an orientation and show them the ropes, which might be particularly helpful for the first time space flyers on this flight, NASA's Woody Hoburg, UAE astronaut Sultan Alneyadi, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Andrey Fedyaev. A direct handover also helps ensure a continuous presence on the space station, a record we've held for more than 22 years. As the station is first and foremost a laboratory, the crew will jump right into conducting experiments with new research still to be delivered on upcoming cargo flights. And now we'll go ahead and toss it back to the team out at Kennedy. Daryl.
All right, thank you very much, Courtney. And as you can see on the screen there, the closeout crew, they are tethered because they're up so high. That's a 255-foot level.
It's a safety measure. Yep, and they're basically taking some closeout photographs to document the hatch closure. We heard them talk about earlier that the hatch closed state. Remember, that's the cue to the crew that's happening. And after they get some closeout photos, they can start backing away and closing out, hence the name of the crew, closing out the white room.
And while we do that, we've got a special guest here that we want to talk to out here at the host desk. Our next guest played a key supportive role in the development of the Falcon 9 rocket and that Dragon spacecraft that we've been watching and will eventually launch here in an hour and 42 minutes. His name is John Posey, and he is NASA's Crew Dragon lead engineer. Thank you so much for being here, John.
Glad to be here.
So tell me, we want to, first of all, make something clear about SpaceX's Dragon, right? They designed it, they built Dragon, they fly it for us, and our astronauts go in it. But since the beginning, there's been NASA expertise supporting them. So what would you say is some of the best expertise that NASA has provided in this regard?
Oh yeah, excellent question. So with the commercial crew program, it's kind of different from past crew spaceflight programs, right? We have a smaller team. Like for the spacecraft, there's around only about 100 NASA engineers on our team that are getting all the work done. And NASA brings a lot of very special expertise to the table to try to help SpaceX and our other commercial partners, prepare for this day, right? Getting everything ready. We especially brought some great expertise in things like life support systems, of course, spacesuits, thermal protection systems, and perform a lot of analysis, in a lot of cases, double checking the great analysis performed by SpaceX, running the numbers, making sure everything matches up so that, we're assured of crew safety on launch day.
Absolutely. Well, that is important. And you were telling me that, speaking of safety requirements, that there was a NASA safety requirement in the case of extreme fire emergency that combined with a Dragon design will make it so that astronauts will be able to do something that's never been done before. What is that?
Oh yeah. So as you mentioned, right? NASA set some really great safety requirements for our crew. The Crew Dragon has a lot of oxygen and nitrox systems on board for those really deep emergency contingency cases. For instance, feed the leak. If we were to have a 1/4 inch sized hole in the cabin, we could provide breathable nitrox air to the crew all the way to landing. Also, in like a fire scenario, if our air scrubber systems couldn't scrub it out or dilution purge wasn't enough, we had the ability to vent the cabin completely to vacuum while the crew's safely pressurized in their spacesuits and press it back up with a clean atmosphere. And so, that's where, the commercial aspect of this is really exciting for us. You saw SpaceX announce for Polaris Dawn, right?
Yeah.
They're going to perform their first Dragon extravehicular activity, EVA, right? Actually do that similar type of a thing where they can vent down the cabin, create like an impromptu airlock, and then repressurize it.
How about that?
Yeah.
And we've got Raja here, an astronaut, depress the cabin. You were ready for it as an emergency scenario, but for Polaris Dawn, going to depress the cabin and they float right out the door.
Yeah, it's super exciting to see the progress going on in low Earth orbit and commercialization. I mean, that's exactly the NASA dream. And you heard the administrator talk about that's what we want to do, is enable industry to do things in low Earth orbit and then let NASA work on exploration in the Moon and Mars. So this is it's amazing to see it happening.
And NASA is right there by the side. Let's talk a little bit now about the Falcon 9. Coincidentally, you were also involved at the beginning of that vehicle with NASA. What contributions were made to the Falcon 9 and getting it going?
Yeah, so I remember being back when I was a space shuttle propulsion engineer, watching those early Falcon 1 live streams, getting the first privately funded rocket to orbit with the liquid propelled vehicle. Really exciting. So when Falcon 9 was coming along on the commercial orbital transportation services COTS contract, they were getting that Dragon 1 ready, Falcon 9 ready, and I remember that program was headed by Kathy Leaders, who later became commercial crew program manager and now associate administrator. But they tasked the launch services team with reviewing the safety of the Falcon 9 for CRS, commercial resupply services. And at the time, shuttle program was winding down. I was on detail to launch services. So I asked if I could join that team to help assess it. And before I knew it, we were working day to day with the SpaceX propulsion engineers. And that was really an eye-opening experience, right? SpaceX was moving at a high pace, rapid pace of innovation, getting a lot of hardware built, getting out there, testing it. And so we were trying to share the lessons learned we had from shuttle and other NASA programs, but at the same time we were learning from them and seeing new approaches and ways of doing things. So we tried to pull together a lot of that expertise, try to share the pitfalls that they might come across along the way. But yeah, I was able to sit in the launch control center. Actually, we were at a hangar AE across for the first Falcon 9 flight, and that was just an amazing day.
Yeah, and now you are working, I think you were telling me, like, as a kid, you drew a picture when you were 10 years old of a space shuttle, and now you got to hang it up on your desk. You have been working in space and thinking about it for a long time.
Oh, yeah. When I was a kid, I was a big fan of, NASA. Space shuttle was on TV, pop culture everywhere.
Yeah.
I was a big Star Trek buff. But it really was solidified when my family went to the Johnson Visitor Center when I was 10. Seeing real spaceflight hardware, just thinking, these folks are bringing, the best things of Star Trek to reality, right? Solving hard problems, learning more about Earth and space, fostering international cooperation. So it's something I set my sights on and went into aerospace engineering to go work on the space program.
And here you are, and you're actually headed right now to Firing Room 4. Real quickly, what are you going to be doing for this launch?
Yeah, so I'm going to be hopping on console for the on-orbit shift as spacecraft chief engineer with the spacecraft engineering team. So I'll go over there. My deputy Brian Remark's about to pull for go to launch from the launch team, and then we'll make sure everything's good to go for our exciting Crew-6 mission today.
All right, fantastic. John Posey, NASA's Crew Dragon lead engineer. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, John. Glad to be here.
And good luck tonight.
Thank you.
All right, now let's head out to our VIP location where our Jasmine Hopkins is with a pair of special guests. Jasmine?
Thank you so much, Daryl. The energy here on the balcony of OSB2 is really picking up as we're getting closer to launch. And right now, I'm honored to be joined by Salam Al-Mari, the Director General of the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, as well as Hazza Al-Mansouri, UAE astronaut. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Thank you, Jasmine, for having us.
Of course, we're so honored to have you here. And Salam, first question for you. This is a really significant First, the first time that we have a commercial crew astronaut from the UAE, what does that mean to you?
I mean, that means a lot. I mean, it's a big responsibility for us. And I think from day one, when we kicked off this program in 2017, we wanted to have a long-term program, a sustainable program, and a program that has a positive impact on human spaceflight. So we selected our astronauts. We made sure they're training with NASA, they're training with Roscosmos. They get the full set of training so that they can be astronauts that can contribute to the advancement of human spaceflight. So this mission really is a fulfillment of that vision. Today, when we get an astronaut from the UAE going on a 6-month increment and doing the same things that NASA astronauts and the USOS astronauts will be doing, I think that really means a lot to the UAE.
It really does. And as you just mentioned, training with NASA Hazal, you were the first Emirati in space. You and Sultan actually trained together. Can you talk about that?
That was really great privilege. I mean, like since childhood, like back in UAE, that to dream to go to space, that was a little bit critical. And even just to say that in schools back home, to say that I want to be an astronaut, that was something that not an option for us. But when they did the announcement back in 2017 and we saw that opportunity, we applied, Sultan and myself and 4,000 applicants from UAE just to apply and to be UAE astronauts. So we had that privilege. We have been selected for the first batch in UAE. We went to Russia to train, and I went to space. I flew to space in 2019. Sultan, he was my backup in that mission, and I am now as his backup in this mission. That was an amazing journey for both of us. I mean, like, we trained back in Russia, ASCAN training. The amount of support we saw in the whole community here at NASA, that was really huge. Just to make this mission happen for UAE. It's big and huge, and we are really excited. I am super excited to see my colleague Sultan and Woody, Steve, and Andrey Fedyaev launch to space. It's going to be an amazing mission for them. 6 months on board the station, doing science, exploring, and conducting different sessions with different schools and kids. That, for me, is big thing.
It really is. It's a big thing. We're so glad to have both of you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course. Daryl, back to you.
Thank you, Jasmine. And now we are T-minus 1 hour and 33 minutes from launch as we get ready for Crew-6 to take off from the Kennedy Space Center. Now, here's a closer look at some of the life-changing science astronauts are performing aboard the International Space Station.
The International Space Station is a state-of-the-art microgravity laboratory that is unlocking discoveries not possible on Earth and helping us push farther into deep space.
Every single day, we are answering big questions about Earth and about space, about where we came from and about where we're going. But the other thing that we're doing is we're learning more questions to ask.
Microgravity turns almost everything we know upside down. Liquids behave completely differently. Fire burns in new ways. Biological systems reveal surprises.
There's a few things that have made me gasp out loud up on board Space Station. Watching heart cells actually beat has been a pretty big one.
We're studying ways to grow food in microgravity.
I got to tell you, these are pretty amazing.
We're learning how human bodies react to life in space and how to keep crew members safe and strong on long-duration exploration missions.
Deadlifts are awesome on Earth. They're also awesome in zero gravity.
We're testing technologies that will be critical to our return to the moon and great leap to Mars. Our research has contributed to medical and social benefits on our home planet, allowing us to find new ways to combat disease back on Earth and develop technologies to deliver clean water to remote communities in need. The spectacular vantage point of more than 200 miles above our planet supports our monitoring of Earth's climate, natural disasters, and plant life.
The orbital perspective that we have here on the ISS is just absolutely amazing. Earth is gorgeous.
The growing new space economy, so vital to our continued progress in space, is flourishing in low Earth orbit. We're inspiring future generations from a platform that is one of the largest international collaborations of our time. We're doing science at 17,500 miles per hour. Come along for the ride.
that's where our 3 astronauts and 1 cosmonaut are headed. But first, got some pre-launch configuration to do. Got to fuel up the rocket. And then, of course, light it and launch. We're coming up on 1 hour and 30 minutes before we launch Crew-6 to the International Space Station. The crew of 4 are in the capsule, as you just saw. The hatch is closed, and we successfully completed a leak check on the hatch, as well as the cabin. Launch engineers are located in Firing Room 4 at the NASA Launch Control Center at Kennedy Space Center. They have a view through their large window of Pad 39A, and this is what they're looking at. You can see the Launch Control Center. It's the building just to the right of the large VAB, just below that NASA logo. The Falcon 9 team is loading helium and nitrogen gas into storage bottles on the launch vehicle. They completed the RF checkouts, the radio frequency, did a final review of the vehicle testing performed earlier today. And the SpaceX chief engineer for this mission, he's Dan Alix, and he will check with the team at T-minus 80 minutes to verify that we are good to continue the countdown. Now, the next major activity is flowing a small amount of fuel into the first stage to prime the Merlin 1D engines for ignition. The team is also monitoring fuel and liquid oxygen loading preparations to make sure the propellants in the ground tanks are correctly chilled prior to loading them on the Falcon, and that will happen at T-minus 35 minutes. I'm with NASA astronaut Rajachari, and let's take a look at the weather really quick. Weather is looking great. We are only a 5% probability of violation, and that's only for the possibility, a very slight possibility, that a cumulus cloud goes over the launch pad. Right now, we're looking clear. We are green on weather. Winds are 7 to 12 miles per hour out of the southwest. Temperature is a comfortable 72 degrees. And the weather in the ascent corridor is also good to go in case there were a abort. Can't ask for better weather conditions than this, Raja.
Yeah, this is a great night for a launch, and let's hope the vehicle stays on progress. Like you mentioned, right now, the next big thing will be when they arm the LES, but before they do that, they'll have to clear out the crew arm. So we saw, like you mentioned, the hatch seal's been checked. And that will be when they let the crew know that they're ready to actually arm the LES before they can start prop loading. You mentioned the Falcon engineers, so like the F9 team is really kind of taking the prime role right now, monitoring the systems, getting ready to make sure it's ready to actually start to load the prop on the vehicle. And the reason they do it on the vehicle, it's because rockets are hard, as it turns out. Getting space is hard, and so your mass margins, the weight is so critical. So you really want to wait until the latest you possibly can to put the gas on the vehicle, because it's cryogenically cooled. I mean, it's super cold, and so it starts to boil off. And so the less amount of time it's on the rocket, the more gas you have. And so you want to wait until as late as you can, but also have enough time, obviously, to do it and get to space. So the longer you wait, and it's a balance of wait as long as you can, but still have enough to get it all on board, and that gives you the most gas to use to get into orbit and then have gas to get to the space station. And
SpaceX using super chilled, highly densified liquid oxygen that, as you say, you get more performance out of it the later they load. Currently, we're at 1 hour and 27 minutes and counting, looking at Launch Complex 39A and the Falcon 9 rocket, a new booster on this one, along with the Dragon Endeavour. The booster 1078-1. No soot on this one, so it didn't return from a flight. They're going to fly it for the first time for Crew-6. It's in good shape and ready to go. Dragon will fly its next 4-person crew to the International Space Station. The astronauts that are inside are Commander Stephen Bowen. He's in seat number 3, pilot Woody Hoburg, and mission specialist Sultan Alneyadi and Andrey Fedyaev.
And you can see they've got their visors up. We talked before about they'll leave their visors up until they arm the LES, or the launch escape system, just to just be a little more comfortable. And you did mention we had actually the opposite configuration for Crew 3. We had a new capsule, Endurance, and then a reused booster. But today, like you said, the fleet-leading Endeavour capsule and a new booster, a new first stage. And one of the cool things we get to see, while the launch coverage, the folks here at actually KSC, the launch coverage is on the capsule, but the other thing that happens with the SpaceX launch is that first stage coming back, which is also a cool thing to see, which I haven't seen before because I haven't seen a launch, but I'm looking forward to that today. So I got to enjoy the ride in the Falcon 9, but never actually saw what happened to the first stage on my launch.
Well, just read the instructions. That's the ship, the autonomous drone ship. It is a landing platform that is out in the Atlantic Ocean right now, several hundred miles offshore, and it will be receiving, as you mentioned, that first stage booster, and we'll see that in our coverage as it comes back down to Earth. And of course, SpaceX has had great success lately with landing that first stage booster, and then they'll put it right back in and get it refurbished and put it into the cycle of boosters for flight.
Yeah, it's impressive, the cadence that we've seen them develop with how quickly we can recycle the boosters. And actually, it's funny, the capsules takes about as long to recycle as it does for us to rehab. So my post-flight rehab was about 6-ish months to kind of feel back to normal, and that's about the same time Endurance launched again onto the space station with Crew 5, so it's up there now. So about the time I had my bone density and muscle all back was the same time that the capsule I rode in was ready to go, new heat shield, layers, and ready to blast off. So it's kind of cool. The person and the machine are both refurbished.
Yeah, you were mentioning when you came back from space, you had to get acclimated, and there was an adjustment period.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's kind of different phases. When you'll see, like when Crew 5 comes back here in a few weeks, you'll see them take them out of the capsule on gurneys. It's difficult to walk and maintain your balance. You can, but it is easy to tip over, and so it takes a few days for your vestibular system to reset, of about a week for kind of your balance and stability, and then potentially a few months for some of your full strength to come back.
When you're in space, you get to bring some personal items with you to kind of remind you of home, right? Each Crew-6 astronaut is allowed to bring a few personal items for the roughly 6-month stay in space. And so here are a few of the items that they are taking up for Crew-6. Sultan Alneyadi said he's bringing a kimono, the traditional training attire of the martial art Jiu-Jitsu. He's on all the way far right of the screen. He's also bringing some small toy rockets from the popular European comic Tintin. Andrey Fedyaev is taking his family photos and some pins he plans on bringing back and sharing with his family. But for the astronaut right there, the second from the left, Woody Hoburg, he's bringing one simple item, and that's a photograph with deep personal meaning to him.
In terms of personal items, mine's simple. Unfortunately, over the summer, I lost my father, and so I'm just bringing a photo of him that means a lot to me. And I wish he could come along with me, but at least I will be bringing him along with me. So. Yeah.
And here is the photo that he's bringing. Woody says it's a picture of his dad, Jim Hoburg, finishing the Boston Marathon and leaving it all on the course. Jim Hoburg, along with his wife Peggy, raised Woody and his brother in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was an electrical engineering professor at Carnegie Mellon University, where he was known for his exceptional teaching. He was 75 years of age when he passed away last year. Woody says he will remember his father for always showing up and for his relentless pursuit of truth. And he says when he gets to space, he plans to keep the photo in his crew quarters. That's a touching thing to do.
Yeah.
And an honor for his father.
And I think just all the more reason we're proud of the turtle's name is Woody's dad is why Woody is Woody, right? So it's just like all of us. And yeah, it was sad for that to happen while he was in training, and I'm glad he's able to take him with him to orbit.
Now, you mentioned that you actually brought some items aboard, and we actually have some of them, some of the things from your flight kit, so I want to take a look at that.
So basically, in the Dragon, you have about a shoebox size of stuff that you can bring, the crew can bring things, so I brought some show and tell. So I also brought some pictures along with my kids, so I've got some cards that my children made for me. So all in all, just like Woody, all these things wound up in my crew quarters on the space station.
This went to space.
This all went to space. This is my PT gear from the Academy, the Air Force Academy.
Okay.
So and people accuse me of buying one, but it's legit because it's still got the stamp with like the laundry stamp.
Yeah.
So that's the real deal. That's it doesn't fit. I think maybe the shirt shrunk over the years. I think is what happened. That's what I tell myself. My wife's gonna kill me, but I'm not supposed to show this.
Oh,
this
boy.
is my space retainer because so I had braces when I was a kid, and now that I'm a dad, having to think about braces for my kids, I know how expensive it is, and I didn't want to have to get braces again, so I took
This is costly.
This is my space retainer. Yeah.
You don't want to have to redo braces.
Exactly.
No.
So
So those things floated around in space
these
and
were
in your
the
mouth.
end of my mouth. Yeah. A turtle patch. Of course.
Of
so
course.
that's pretty typical for to bring patches, things like that. My wife made me. I had several cards for different days of the week, so care package style cards.
Really,
So,
for every
not every day.
Okay.
But this was like any Thursday card.
Oh, that's sweet.
So like most things in my life, she's better than me, so she thought of that. This is a pair of dice. So this is in my first fighter squadron in the Air Force was the 90th Fighter Squadron, which is the pair of dice. And if you notice, any direction is always 7, lucky 7. And so you get your first one. You basically get these pair after you're combat qualified in the 90th Fighter Squadron, and then you wear them on your pocket. And then an RMO, which stands for round metal object. We avoid saying the word COIN in the Air Force. It's tradition because when you say the word, that's a challenge to someone that they have to have it. So we use the acronym RMO. But so this is our Crew 3 one, our Crew 3 patch, and then
design.
our Expedition 66 patch on
Which,
the back.
hold that for a second. That was really neat. You helped in the design of this with the fire coming out of the dragon.
With the dragon.
Making the 3.
Exactly. Yeah. So the Crew 3 patch has the 3, and then the dragon, like the head of a dragon in the flame. And people do point out this is you wouldn't want to actually see flame.
Well, yeah, no.
That would be a bad thing. That would be the abort engine. But it's a cool visual graphic.
Yeah, very good, very good. And all that stuff went to space.
It did. Yep.
So thank you for sharing that with us. That was really neat to walk through everything that you took up, and all of that fit into a shoebox.
All of it fits in a shoebox. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so
in
much.
In space, it floats out, so you got to be really careful to keep track of it all.
Right. You mentioned, the crew patch, and so on that note, every NASA space flight going to station has a mission patch designed by the crew, and this is Crew-6's mission patch, and what you'll notice right away is the wooden dragon ship with a dragon figurehead. That's because each Crew-6 member has an affinity for seafaring vessels. How about that? And check out the anchor. It's the International Space Station sitting right there on the ship. Lastly, the sail, Crew-6 says, represents the 3 planetary bodies of the Earth, Moon, and Mars. And you can see the Earth in blue, the Moon in gray and white with the number 6, and then the ultimate destination of NASA's Artemis program, the red planet. That's a pretty cool design.
Very cool, yeah. That's the cool thing about patches. There's always so much hidden meaning in it. It's all the subtleties and the themes, even down to the colors and the number of stars. All that it goes into it. So it's always a fun thing to design a patch and kind of pull in a little bit of each person in the crew into it.
And you work very closely with the artist that designed your patch, and every astronaut does, right?
We do, yep, yeah. So the JSC helps. We had a known artist. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say his name, but basically did it pro bono for us. That helped out, which was super super grateful for that. But you're exactly right. We would kind of have some ideas of like some themes, then you kind of iterate on that with them. And the same thing. So there's the crew patch, and then I think Courtney mentioned earlier when they get to the space station, they'll be part of Expedition 68, which also has a patch, and then they will also be up there for Expedition 69. So they'll have usually have a vehicle patch and then a expedition patch.
Raja, full of so much exciting information here and insight into what it's like to be a NASA astronaut and to fly this Crew Dragon, go up to the International Space Station. So we want to ask another social question. Send them all in: Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. And here's a question from @11B. Does the 2+ hours in the seats prior to launch go slowly, or is the level of activity such that time passes quickly?
It's a good question. So I would say it actually goes pretty quick because what they're actually doing, and you can see actually all of them are tapping away at screens there, even though the crew's not, right now they're waiting for the closeout crew to finish up and the F9 team is doing most of the work. What they're doing is kind of walking through all the displays and we call it chair flying, going through the sequences and actually kind of talking through some off-nominal events as well. And so they're using all this as rehearsal time because now that's the actual day of, there's different things that will be specific to the weather in terms of what egress set you might go to. And we mentioned before, like what's the commander's job is kind of like the coach and talking about like, okay, if this happens, remember, and I don't know what their sequence is, but like, okay, Sultan, you're doing this, Andrey, you're doing this, and you're kind of just walking through those and mentally talking through all of them. And then what Woody and Steve are probably doing on their iPads is going through the displays they're going to see for the different phases of the launch, the different stages. So they have basically a preview mode on there, and they can talk through, okay, at, stage 1A, I'm going to make that call, this is what we're looking for, remember we're looking at the altitude tape. So they're basically mentally walking through all the phases, because once it happens, once the rocket lights,
it happens fast.
That's exactly, from the time it lights to orbit's like 8 to 9 minutes, so you can't it's too late to talk about it then. So you're using all this time to go through all those sequences and talk about, okay, what if we have to, what if the cage of a stage 2D abort, and what are we going to do, and all the different what ifs, because there's different decision paths in each of those procedures, and you're sort of walking through like, okay, if we go down this path, remember, here's the things to remember. So it's just one last training session, if you will.
Seems like a lot doing these mental reps and going through, but that really greases you.
Exactly, and that's why then it becomes just kind of muscle memory when you're actually in the moment then.
All right, we have another question. Joab MSM asks, what does an astronaut do for NASA while they are not in space?
I'm glad you asked that, because that's one of the things I try to harp on the most when I do public affairs events is most of our job is not flying in space. Of course, we all love to fly in space, but for example, Tom Marshburn, who was my pilot on Crew 3, he was in the office for 28 years and spent about a year and a half in space, but that's not much time compared to the 28 years in the office. So most of our job is all the development and engineering and science work for all the programs that are going on. So right now, Artemis is what we're all working on. So there's the SLS rocket, there's the Gateway lunar habitat, there's the HLS, which is the human landing system. That's the lunar lander.
That's what you're working on.
That's what I'm working on. Yeah. There's the Orion capsule. So all of us are working on these different programs, helping with the development of them. And then we also have all kinds of other jobs just to keep the office going. So we have, you saw Reed, who was the former chief of the office. Joe is now the chief. So that's a job. Right? You've got branch chiefs who are running all the different personnel in the office. So these are all those jobs are what we do when we're not flying in space, but we still maintain a currency. So you're doing a job, but you're still flying the T-38. You're still doing NBL runs, the neutral buoyancy, which is where we practice our spacewalks. You're still doing biology training, geology training. You're doing all these things, ISS training at a currency level. And then once you're assigned, you stop doing your technical job and work solely on preparing for the launch vehicle on that particular expedition on the space station.
And I know you've been busy too, because even in your time helping us with the broadcast, we're greatly appreciative of you being here. You've been busy, like you're on your laptop, finishing up some work and stuff. So we really appreciate you taking the time to be here for the broadcast.
I think that's why we all love our jobs.
Yeah.
It's fun.
All right, let's check in now and go back to Houston, Texas with Courtney Beasley. What's happening in Mission Control, Courtney?
Thanks, Daryl. The flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston are laser focused on the onboard systems of the space station, ensuring it is ready to receive Crew Dragon. They're also making sure all communication links between the station, Dragon, and the ground are working properly. The consensus to this point is that everything is proceeding right on track. Teams here in Mission Control Houston, the team in Hawthorne, and the astronauts aboard the space station will monitor the autonomous docking of the spacecraft tomorrow. They'll perform a series of leak checks, then work to open the hatches on the Dragon side and inside the station's pressurized mating adapter. We expect hatch opening to take place about an hour and a half after docking. Once on board, the astronauts will be greeted by the space station crew and will then join in for welcoming remarks for the new crew members. From there on out, they will no longer be referred to as Crew-6, but rather as flight engineers of the International Space Station until their return back to Earth. Here in Mission Control Houston, Flight Director Chris Dobbins is now on console overseeing the team for launch. And that's it from Mission Control Houston for now, so I'll toss it back to the team in Florida. Daryl.
Commercial Crew program. It was created in 2011 and has been flying astronauts from American soil to the International Space Station for the last 2 years. Let's bring in NASA's Jasmine Hopkins again, who's with Kennedy Center Director Janet Petro and Deputy Director Kelvin Manning.
Thank you so much, Daryl. Janet Petrel, Kelvin Manning, always a pleasure to have you guys here. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Of course. So, Janet, I know that one of your catchphrases is embrace the challenge. So talk to us about how the workforce has done that here at Kennedy to return to human spaceflight in just the past few years.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I do like to say embrace the challenge, and I would tell you the Kennedy workforce has really embraced the challenge. You know, if I start with last year, we were celebrating our 60th anniversary. We ended the year with that very historic Artemis 1 mission, and we were established 60 years ago, all about the Apollo missions and going back to the moon. So Artemis, we're going back to the moon, more sustainable way. And here we are, and we are going to be with our 6th SpaceX operational mission, Crew-6 tonight. So the whole transformation of the center from that just government-only focused center to what we are today. We have a very vibrant space ecosystem out here, multitude of commercial companies as well as our government programs working. So we have embraced the challenge of transforming to be the 21st century spaceport.
Exactly. And Janet, I'm glad you used that word spaceport. Kelvin, question for you. It's no longer just NASA out here. We're working with a lot of our industry partners. So how is Kennedy supporting them?
Well, we're supporting them in many ways, Jasmine. It's interesting because we have a new vision statement, and our vision is that igniting exploration and discovery for all. And the mission is to provide continuous access to space from Earth's premier spaceport right here through creativity and innovation. So you see all that coming to fruition here through our vision, and it's the government, industry, as well as our international partners.
That is great. Kelvin, thank you so much for sharing that vision. And right now, Crew-6 is launching at the end of Black History Month. We know that Kennedy has been doing a lot to celebrate that as well as the agency. Can you both tell us about that?
Yeah, so we've had a number of events around. One of our employee resource groups is the Black Engineering Strategy Team, BEST. That's our African, but really all of our ERGs here really promote our core value of inclusion that we have here at NASA. We're so proud of all the ERGs. Numerous events throughout the month of February celebrating that.
Exactly. Kelvin, would you like to add anything?
Oh, sure. So,
by the way, Kelvin's our champion for BEST.
Oh,
executive
fantastic.
champion.
Executive champion.
That's correct. And through diversity gives us innovation. You know, people with different backgrounds, different thoughts. We want to be inclusive, like Janet said, and through diversity, we get that innovation that helps us solve the agency's challenges. And we've got a lot in front of us to return to the moon and onto Mars.
Exactly. And one last question. Last year we had 57 launches from Cape Canaveral. This year we're slated to have over 90. What do you think of that fury of launches coming for us, Janet?
It really is amazing. You know, the year before last, it was 31, 57, 94. We're going to be well over 100 in a couple years. And all of across the center requires the support for every single launch, whether it's on our property or if it's on the Space Force property. Together, Kelvin talked a little bit about those partnerships. We work together to make all those launches successful, whether it's commercial, whether it's a government launch, a national security mission. We all work together for that. So we're busy. You know, I thought we were really busy for Artemis at the end and 57 launches this year. We're even going to be more busy, if you will, supporting all those launches. But we are incredibly proud of what we have accomplished at the spaceport. Couldn't have imagined it 10 years ago that we would be at nearly 100 launches in the decade from the last shuttle launch. So incredibly proud of the entire Kennedy workforce.
Exactly. Busy is the right word. Kelvin, anything last to add?
Sure. And the cool part is we have commercial partners out here that haven't launched yet. So we tell people we're just getting started. So
Exactly.
It's very exciting.
Right. No, that is perfect. We really are just getting started here at Kennedy. Always great to have both of you here tonight.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Of course.
Thank you.
Daryl, back to you.
Thank you, Jasmine. And if you're just joining us now, welcome to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida and NASA's live coverage of the Crew-6 launch to the International Space Station. I'm Daryl Nail. I'm joined by Raja Chari, a recent flyer on Dragon. Crew-3, the commander. Glad to have you here.
Thanks. It's glad to be here, and it's getting close.
The
rocket's looking good out there.
It sure is. We've run down through a few milestones already. We've gotten to a critical part where we are awaiting now the launch escape system to be armed, as well well as the fueling of the rocket. Leading up until that point, we've had the crew go into the spacecraft that you see right there. They were helped by our closeout team. The umbilicals were attached, which provide breathing air and communications to the astronauts. They did their suit leak checks. We saw them pressurized and then depressed. And then the comms checks were completed with the core, the crew operations resource engineer with SpaceX, and the launch director. And now we are standing by for those next big milestones. And in the meantime, we've been taking your questions from hashtag AskNASA, all of them from social media, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and Facebook. And we've got a question coming up for us right now on the screen for Raja. And from Twitch asks, how long will the crew stay on space station?
Well, it varies, but generally the expeditions are about 4 to 6 months. It can change a little bit depending on the traffic flow. The space station is sort of like a giant bus terminal in the sky with vehicles coming and going. So yeah, Crew-6 planned about a 6-month stay. When I was up there, Mark Vande Hei did a year-long mission. Then Frank Rubio, who's up there now, will also be about a year-long mission. The reason we're trying to go longer and learn more is as we go to the moon and Mars to stay, we really want to make sure that we understand the effects of the human body on long-duration space flights.
Very good. Another question. Mr. Beast from YouTube asks, what will they be working on during their 6-month stay on the ISS? Also, why will NASA's coverage of the mission switch to an audio-only feed after ascent? Well, I can help out with the audio-only feed, but you want to answer about what they're going to be working on?
Sure. So the big answer is science, and so the ISS is a national laboratory in the sky, and it's specifically we do research that can only be done in microgravity. You heard Dr. Kurt talk a little bit earlier about some of the things specific to their increment have to do with some tissue chip research. They're going to do some swabs on the outside of the space station, which is the first time we're going to have done that, to see if microbes from our human body, so we bring along as humans this whole, all this stuff that comes off of us, and one curiosity is from a planetary protection standpoint is whether we would be contaminating the outside of the space station and what implications that has for the moon and Mars. They're going to be doing some more plant research, so I would say, we understand how to grow plants in space, but it takes a lot of crew time to do it. So kind of the next step is how to do that with better what we call regolith simulants, which is like basically dirt, because you just can't have normal dirt in space, it floats away. So you need to figure out some way to have a root system, and so that's where kind of the research for plant technology is at right now. So they're going to be involved in all that, but all told, in a normal 6-month increment, they're probably going to do upwards of 300 different science experiments, which is just an incredible number, over 2 a day, and then all the work to support those science experiments.
That's an incredible amount of science that's going to be done. Now, with regards to the second part of that question, why will NASA's coverage of the mission switch to an audio-only feed after ascent? Now, traditionally, we've done video the entire time, but that is correct. We are going to switch to audio only after the ascent portion of the flight, and that's because the length of the crew's transit to the station, which is 24.8 hours, we elected to maintain commentary on mission audio circuits during the lengthy period of non-activity and while the Dragon crew is asleep. So we are continuing coverage non-stop and will resume NASA TV coverage on Monday night prior to the start of critical rendezvous operations. But in the time in between, we're going to allow you to hear the mission audio, that critical communication between the ground and Dragon. If there is any, we'll keep that up live, but we won't have a commentator speaking to it. And now we are getting close to 1 hour until liftoff. This day is the continuation of regular crew flights to the space station from U.S. soil. T-minus 1 hour and 2 minutes and counting until SpaceX's Crew-6 mission, which will be the company's 6th crewed spaceflight for NASA, following the crewed test flight of Demo 2 and 4 previous operational crewed missions to the space station. It will also be SpaceX's 8th crewed spaceflight overall, and that includes the private missions, Inspiration 4 and Axiom 1, which visited Raja while he was on board station. Today, our crew is flying on board Dragon Endeavour, and it will be the 4th flight for this capsule, and it will be taking a ride on a brand new Falcon 9 rocket that you see below it. We've had a great countdown so far. We just got a report on the weather, and it's just spectacular out there, both at the pad and then the corridor weather also looks great, according to our friends at JSC. So they're doing some final pad wind evaluations, and it's all coming together, releasing some balloons, getting those final wind data in the upper parts of the atmosphere, and so far everything's looking good. We're getting a little bit of a breeze now,
Dragon
which is
SpaceX
keeping the bugs off us.
Take isolation
nice.
valves to equalize low flow pressure.
SpaceX Dragon copies.
And so the reason they tell them, so there's nothing the crew's actually doing for that particular call, but they let the crew know a lot of those valve openings and closings, because you can actually hear it and feel it inside the vehicle. You can hear the thunk or the clunk, and so it's good to know that's about to happen, so you don't just hear something happening in your vehicle without, otherwise it'd be a bit discomforting to hear a big metal shank clunk without knowing if that's supposed to happen or not.
It's a good heads up by SpaceX to let the astronauts know what's coming. So with about an hour to go until liftoff, things are really going to start picking up, as you've already noticed. We'll get close to the go, no-go pole to arm the launch escape system, and then, of course, begin the propellant loading. The crew poll for readiness happens at T-minus 60 minutes in just a few seconds, and then the Dragon poll for prop load is at T-minus 55 minutes. From there, at T-minus 45 minutes, there will be an internal mission control Hawthorne poll, and then the launch director's poll for propellant loading. And then when we get to about T-minus 40 minutes,
Dragon
the crew
SpaceX,
access arm will
you
retract.
are go for section 5 of 4.100. When ready, report go for launch.
And there's the T-minus 60
And
poll.
we copy. We're picking up in 5.1 of 4.100.
So that's that 4.100 procedure we were talking about earlier. So they're still in that, and then there's different sections like we described. So this particular section is preparation for LES arming, or the launch escape system arming. And so what they're doing inside the capsule now is one last check, making sure they're fully restrained. There's no loose items. They may have had their feet out of the boot restraints just to relax and stretch out their legs, but at this point they're going to be putting them all in. And the reason is, once the launch escape system is hot, it's just like an ejection seat. The whole thing can fire, and so you want to be fully restrained, fully in a position where if it did basically pop the capsule off, that you're not going to get injured doing that. And it's armed prior to launch, because as soon as we start putting propellant in the Dragon, you want the ability to basically have that system active.
And when we get to about T-minus 40 minutes, the crew access arm will retract, and the crew will get the call to close their visors and to arm the launch escape system. This is the automated safety system in place that can fire the 8 Super Draco thrusters on Dragon to quickly separate the crew from the rocket, either on the pad or during flight on the ride uphill. And then once we reach about T-minus 35 minutes, propellant loading for the Falcon 9 will begin.
And SpaceX Dragon, we are go for launch.
SpaceX copies, crews go.
There you heard the go. And thanks for tuning in. You're watching live launch coverage of NASA and SpaceX's 6th rotational flight of astronauts and 1 cosmonaut to the International Space Station. We are T-minus 58 minutes and counting until liftoff. And with us today is NASA astronaut Raja Chari, the commander from Crew 3. Thanks so much for being here.
Daryl. And you just heard Steve Bowen say they're go for launch, which is a kind of a cool time for definitely some fist bumps inside the capsule at that point. That's the crew saying we are go for the next few steps of go for propellant loading, LES arming, and go for launch. And so that's that is their vote, and you heard them say they're ready.
Good stuff inside the capsule. Liftoff time is still holding for 1:45 and 3 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. And we're tracking no issues with the Falcon 9 or Dragon, as Raza just mentioned. Got that beautiful shot from the helicopter around the vehicle assembly building. No issues with the Falcon 9 or Dragon. The range screen and weather, both here at the pad and in the launch corridor, the ascent corridor, is cooperating. Now to take you back Over the last 3 hours, our crew of Stephen Bowen, Woody Hoburg, Sultan Alneyadi, and Andrey Fedyaev have been getting ready to launch into space. And this is going back to crew suit up. Here they are in astronaut crew quarters. After waking up and having a meal, SpaceX helped the astronauts into their suits at that historic crew quarters suit up room. Then the crew walked out on the same path that every NASA astronaut has done since Apollo 7, waving to family and friends and loved ones, as well as the cameras that were there to document their journey. After getting inside their Teslas, new ones, colored black, they joined a caravan led by Center Security on a 20-minute ride to the launch complex 39A. And following their arrival to the pad, you see them doing the rocket recline, looking up at the rocket. And then they went up the tower and walked across this crew access arm, leading them to their spacecraft, making the duck, getting in the hatch, and climbing inside Dragon Endeavour. Then they got strapped in with the help from the closeout crew. And now we are watching them live while they await liftoff. And we're here at the host desk at the Kennedy Space Center. Raj and I have been counting it down as we went along, and he's been giving us great insight into the whole process of getting ready to launch on a mission. It's been really good.
It's been very exciting to be here and to get to see a rocket launch from the outside. So looking forward to it.
Your first time, as a matter of fact, and
Yep.
so we're interested on hearing your reaction after that. But at this time, we are expanding our coverage and would like to welcome in SpaceX and NASA commentators joining us live from Hawthorne, California. Welcome to you both.
All right, thank you, Daryl, and hello to all of our viewers. I'm Gary Jordan with NASA Communications.
And I'm Jesse Anderson, a production engineering manager here at SpaceX. Gary and I are joining you today from our headquarters in Hawthorne, California, and it's definitely been a very busy evening so far. As we continue the countdown to liftoff, we'd like to welcome you to SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne. This is where our teams are staffed around the clock to monitor Dragon and the mission overall. On console or headset in Mission Control are 6 key positions. The mission director is in charge of the room and tasked with making real-time decisions to ensure mission success. The person that you may have heard talking to the astronauts is the Crew Operations and Resources Engineer, who you'll hear us refer to as the core throughout the broadcast. And the 4 additional team members are focused on vehicle systems, including avionics, navigation and control, software, propulsion, life support, and communication with ground support teams. Now, apart from Mission Control, our Falcon 9 team is currently located in Firing Room 4 in the Launch Control Center at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. With less than an hour until launch, they are settling in for final checkouts, propellant loading, and for launch.
That's right, and NASA has its own team members in Mission Control in Houston, Texas, where they've been preparing the space station for Dragon's arrival, and recently gave their go for launch, saying that the station itself is ready to receive the new crew. Upon liftoff, today's ride to the space station will take about 25 hours, with Dragon flying autonomously the entire way. And just like an autopilot on a commercial aircraft, the crew always has the ability to take manual control of the spacecraft if necessary.
Now at T-minus 53 minutes, 8 seconds to go, we are looking good for an on-time liftoff. And our very own incredible Kate Tice has been monitoring the progress of the countdown. How's it going, Kate?
Thanks, Jesse. I'm Kate Tice, SpaceX Quality Systems Engineering Manager. And for those that have just recently tuned in, we had a smooth countdown so far today. The Crew-6 astronauts completed ingress at T-minus 2 hours and 23 minutes. And since then, the teams have completed the required comm checks, suit leak checks, and side hatch closure, as well as its associated leak check. As for Falcon 9, our 2-stage reusable rocket, final propulsion checkouts of first and second stages of the engine began a few minutes ago in preparation for propellant loading. Now that involves testing and cycling the valves and engine pneumatics for pressurization. At T-minus 45 minutes, the team will report their readiness for prop load with a final electronic go, no-go poll. But before we can start loading propellant on the Falcon 9, we have a few tasks to perform. First, we need to retract the crew access arm away from the Dragon capsule to its launch position. That will happen between T-minus 44 minutes and T-minus 42 minutes. Then, with that crew arm out of the way, the launch escape system will be armed. Once those 2 events are complete, Dragon will be ready for Falcon propellant loading. Now, we'll also verify with the launch weather officer that all the weather meets all the constraints. That includes items such as wind speed, as well as lightning and precipitation. However, for tonight, we expect acceptable weather conditions for launch, both at surface level and upper altitudes. As we reported earlier, the possibility of violation for all of those criteria is only 5%. So pretty good for Cape Canaveral, looking good there. As for the range, currently clear for launch from historic pad 39A. Worldwide network of ground stations and the tracking and data relay satellites, or TDRS, as you hear it called out on the nets, those are ready to support Dragon as it heads into orbit. Today, we have an instantaneous launch window at 1:45 a.m. Eastern. Once we begin propellant loading, there is no opportunity to change that T0. The timing for Dragon to rendezvous with the ISS is incredibly precise down to the exact second. So therefore, we only get one chance to go to space today. But at good news, at T-minus 51 minutes and 5 seconds, we are good for launch. Good to go.
Great to hear, Kate. Today's launch marks the 6th time a rotational crew will fly on a commercial spacecraft. And much like our previous crews, today's crew has been training with our teams at SpaceX for the last several months, running nominal and emergency simulations of what the full mission will look like while seated inside of Dragon. And as with every mission, set of experiences to today's flight.
That's right, and we'll start with the mission's commander. Steve Bowen was born in Cohasset, Massachusetts. He holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the U.S. Naval Academy and a master's in ocean engineering from the Joint Program in Applied Ocean Science and Engineering at MIT and Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. In July 2000, Bowen became the first submarine officer selected as an astronaut by NASA. This will be Bowen's 4th trip into space as a veteran of 3 space shuttle missions, STS-126 in 2008, STS-132 in 2010, and STS-133 in 2011. Bowen has logged more than 40 days in space, including 47 hours, 18 minutes during 7 spacewalks. As the mission commander, he'll be responsible for all phases of flight aboard Dragon, from launch to re-entry.
Warren Woody Hoburg is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He earned a bachelor's degree in aeronautics and astronautics from MIT and a doctorate in electrical engineering and computer science from the University of California, Berkeley. He is also a commercial pilot with instrument, single-engine, and multi-engine ratings. The mission will be Hoburg's first flight since his selection as an astronaut in 2017. As pilot, he will be responsible for spacecraft systems and performance on Dragon.
Sultan Alneyadi will be making his first trip into space, representing the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center of the United Arab Emirates. Aboard Dragon, he'll serve as a mission specialist, working to monitor the spacecraft during the dynamic launch and re-entry phases of flight. He spent time in the UAE military prior to becoming one of the first 2 individuals selected by his country when they started their space program just a few short years ago in 2017. Alneyadi will be the first UAE astronaut to fly on a commercial spacecraft.
Andrey Fedyaev will be making his first trip to space and will also serve as a mission specialist, monitoring the spacecraft during the dynamic launch and re-entry phases of flight. He was selected as a cosmonaut in 2012 and will be the 2nd cosmonaut to fly aboard a SpaceX Dragon. Each of these crew members will be a part of Expedition 68 upon their arrival to the International Space Station. Now let's head back over to Kate for another status update on the countdown. How's it going, Kate?
Thanks, Jesse. It's now T-minus 48 minutes and 5 seconds. The SpaceX launch teams are finishing final review of data from checkouts of Falcon 9 that have occurred over the last hour. The launch director has confirmed with the launch weather officer that weather meets propellant loading constraints. So next up will be to poll the team for readiness, both to load propellant and to launch. Therefore, that will be the final poll that occurs prior to liftoff. The 7 SpaceX responsible engineers, often called REs, indicate that launch and prop load electronically, voting on the online countdown procedure. The launch director, or LD, as it's called out on the nets, also checks with the Dragon mission director, or MD, as well as the NASA launch manager to make sure that they are ready. Now, earlier you saw the Vehicle Assembly Building, lovingly referred to as the VAB. The Falcon and Dragon launch team, as well as key NASA launch members, are in the Launch Control Center, which is adjacent to the VAB. You have a view of that room there on the left-hand side of your screen. That is Firing Room 4, and they have a view looking straight toward Pad 39A. Now, there also on your screen on the right-hand side, you can see the Dragon capsule. That crew access arm is still in the service position. Inside the capsule there are 4 crew members looking pretty comfy and pretty relaxed prior to liftoff. As you can see, that crew on board Dragon, they're waiting for the next instructions. The launch escape system. Now, once the launch director gives the final instructions to the launch team, the crew arm sequence will be armed and initiated. Now, we should get a good view of the access arm as it swings away from the capsule, which will take about 2 minutes to completely move out of the way. Checking in on the range continues to be go for launch there. They are monitoring the clearance area around the launch pad as well as the air and sea space around the flight corridor. There at Kennedy Space Center, the weather conditions are predicted to be acceptable for launch. As I mentioned before, only a 5% chance of violating the conditions, which include winds, both upper and launch altitudes, thick clouds, as well as the downrange landing zones. In the unlikely event that an abort is called for in that escape sequence, we have to make sure that the weather for those downrange landing zones is also acceptable. But everything is looking good on the weather front. Now we are expecting that final pull from the LD to occur here in about 20 seconds. So we will pause and listen in for that announcement.
Pull is complete and the team is ready for crew access arm retract, propellant load, and launch. Both control rooms will go into lockdown at T-minus 45 minutes and remain in that state until the launch escape system is disarmed. All operators are to remain in their console and maintain a sterile cockpit until MD confirms successful disarming of the launch escape system following orbit insertion or propellant offload in the event of a scrub. For non-urgent no-go conditions, brief the CE or the LD, and they'll approve aborting the launch countdown. For urgent issues affecting the safety of the operation, operators shall call hold on the countdown net. Launch control will abort the launch sequence immediately and proceed into the launch abort sequence. At T-minus 10 seconds, launch control will be hands-off, relying on automated abort criteria for the remainder of the count. Operators advise the launch director whether structural breakup is imminent or occurring per Dragon manual escape flight rules. Launch control, you may proceed with arming the crew arm for movement.
Proceeding with crew arm movement.
All right, as you just heard there, that final go for launch as well as for propellant load coming from the launch director or LD. So all good news there. We are still go for space tonight. As of right now, the crew access arm is being prepared to be moved out of the way. So to clear room for the Falcon 9 to lift off. So to follow along with that action live, let's go back over to...
Arm retraction has started.
And there's that call out for that retraction beginning. Let's go back over to Daryl to follow that live at KSC.
All right, thank you, Kate. Appreciate it. The countdown continuing to tick down as you see the crew access arm moving away. I'm here with astronaut Rajachari. That crew access arm, as it rotates out of the way, is that something that you can feel when it disconnects?
So we talked about that. we could definitely hear thought we sense the vibration of it. I think we got a little bit of sense of motion from the wind, but I don't know if we were just imagining it or not. Because there's a whole lot of your senses are super heightened right now. Yeah. So you're definitely we actually did talk through. I do remember talking to them as we talked earlier about how you're kind of going through different scenarios and timelines. And one thing is, if there is a emergency egress button in the capsule, but one of the things, the big difference is now that the arm is swung back, is you definitely want to make sure the arm has swung back towards you in the event of an egress. That makes sense, because you don't want to step out into nothing. Because at this point, the LES is not hot, but the arm
so
has
the
retracted
arm would
away.
have to come
the arm
back.
has to swing back. Yes, and there's two rates. So the arm moves away at a slow rate, but in the event of an emergency egress, it swings back at a pretty quick rate, rightfully so, because you want to get out quickly.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things they're probably talking through. Is like, hey, don't forget, first person out the door, make sure to look down first. Make sure there's a if it has to swung back into place.
Great insight there, Raja, on the crew access arm. I didn't know that about it being able to return so quickly, but it makes great sense from a safety perspective. And so now, coming up, we expect to hear a call to arm the launch escape system.
Yep, and so the crew at this point, in preparation for that, will be putting the visors down. They should have already done all those steps. They'll verify that, and once they get the go, then they will arm the LES and get confirmation that it is armed. We talked before about the hatch closed state, so that's also in this phase. That's the way you actually know it's armed, is you see the flight computer state change. So it's a command you send to put it into the armed state, and then you know it's happened. When you'll hear sounds, but that's the official way you know it's actually there. And really the purpose of the LES, the launch escape system, is it's both an automated and a manual system. So there's the vehicle is monitoring a whole bunch of parameters, and so one of the reasons they have to do a poll for arming is all the operators on the ground are checking that there's no parameter out of limits that would trigger an escape inadvertently. So you don't want to turn on the system only to have it immediately fire the capsule off. So the first thing they're doing is making sure all the parameters are stable, the telemetry is good, there's no noisy signals in the data that would inadvertently trigger it, and then you arm the system. And then once it's armed, there's the automated abort, and then there's also a manual abort. So I don't know that you can see it in the camera views we have, but there's a handle that sits between Woody and Steve that you can reach, you rotate and pull, that will manually initiate an abort. And so just very similar to an ejection seat where you pull the handle.
Arm retraction complete.
I mean, that's a big responsibility for the commander and pilot if you had to pull that handle. I mean, you don't want to do that unless you're absolutely certain.
Exactly.
You gotta get out of there.
Exactly. And so there's the few cases, or if that's why earlier they did all those checks on the loops to make sure that the people on the ground that have the insight to the status of the F9 and the Dragon have the ability to talk to the crew. So if there's a failure of the automated system, that someone could tell the crew to manually initiate, or there may be some scenarios where the crew may know something first and manually initiate.
In just a few seconds, we're going to hear Dragon to ground and that announcement for go for section 7. And
Dragon, SpaceX, you are go for section 6. Close visors and arm launch escape system.
Okay, section 6.
All right, section 6 is in work.
I think it used to be 7, though.
It is, yeah. So which it's a great sign that they're constantly, like we talked about before.
SpaceX Dragon visors are closed.
Constantly learning and making changes to procedures.
Right. Earlier tonight, we saw a lot of work happening in parallel for the first time. So we had a lot of margin left over. And there you can see the white room exposed to the elements outside.
SpaceX Dragon arming and launch escape system.
Okay, so that's Steve telling them that they're
SpaceX copies.
Initiating the command. Like we mentioned, they'll do it. Actually, you can hear this. You can definitely hear this and feel it in the vehicle. There's some valves that are opening that are to the Super Dracos, which are the engines that would fire to initiate an abort, and those valves are safed until this point. So this command is essentially unsafing those valves, and you can very definitely hear and feel that inside the capsule.
Those Super Draco engines you mentioned, Raja, capable of moving Dragon half a mile in just 7.5 seconds, equivalent to a peak velocity of 436 miles per hour. Such a tremendous focus on safety because the astronaut lives are in the hands of SpaceX, and they want to get them out of there as fast as possible if there were to be an abort.
It's an impressive system. So actually, we did a flight test of the abort system before Demo 2, and that was impressive to see that thing work. And yeah, just a strong testament. I think one of the key things of the Commercial Crew program of having launch abort systems on both the Starliner and the Dragon, just a testament to how much we've learned over the years of space flight and try to make it as safe as we can going forward. You heard the call from SpaceX confirming that the launch escape system is armed. So the next big thing now that it's armed, now it is safe to start loading prop once they get the go for that.
If there were a pad abort, it would take the Dragon capsule 2.5 miles east of Pad A into the Atlantic Ocean. Dragon would come down under its parachutes, land in the ocean. Could take about 4 hours to remove the crew. We have assets with the Air Force called Detachment 3.
Yep, Det 3 is what they call it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's what's called PJs, or pararescue jumpers. So we use a myriad of assets. The Air Force and Navy help support these launches on both coasts. Basically the C-17, C-130s, helicopters, PJs. It's quite a group, and all the more reason we have to look at that whole weather and abort corridor to have that ready if we need help.
Yeah, because if they landed in the Atlantic Ocean, it would take some time to get there. We've got assets along the eastern seaboard. Could take about 6 to 8 hours. So you want those seas to be calm and not bobbing around in the ocean for that long.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we're getting ready to get that propellant load started.
And once they start that load, you'll start making calls for different phases of load, like the LOX, the helium, different things. And the reason they're doing that is, again, you can hear that and feel it inside the vehicle as different valves open and close. You can hear the sounds of fluid flowing, feel some different vibrations. And so that's why they're calling those, so the crew isn't aware of if something's nominal or off nominal. If you hear a sound without a call, that could make you worry. So that way you know, like, okay, that's the one that we expected to, that valve was supposed to open or supposed to close.
Mm.
Propellant load has started.
Okay, and there we have the call that propellant load has begun. A big milestone as we count down to liftoff. Now T-minus 34 minutes and counting. Today we'll begin the next 6-month rotation mission to the International Space Station. The launch escape system is armed, which happened just before we began the loading the propellant onto Falcon 9. Meanwhile, the Dragon capsule was loaded with its propellants about a week and a half ago, just a few miles down the road at a facility SpaceX calls Dragonland. In order to fly, Dragon needs a fuel and an oxidizer. For the fuel, SpaceX uses monomethyl hydrazine, or MMH, and nitrogen tetroxide, or NTO, for oxidizer, and together these propellants feed those Draco engines that maneuver Dragon on orbit, as well as the 8 Super Draco engines that would power the launch escape system in an abort scenario. And again, now that the fueling for Falcon 9 has started, that means the 8 Super Draco engines inside Crew Dragon are ready, if needed, to launch the capsule away from the Falcon 9 rocket in an instant, should there be any kind of emergency associated with the rocket or the pad. Of course, NASA and SpaceX trains extensively for exactly that type of contingency. So now let's head over to SpaceX commentator Kate Tice at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne for an operations update. Kate.
Thanks, Daryl. Yeah, exactly right. We're continuing to count down the final minutes. Everything's still looking good for Falcon 9 and Dragon, with the teams reporting no major issues at this time. Now, with the launch escape system armed and Falcon 9 propellant loading underway, we are heading for an on-time launch just under 33 minutes from now. As we saw earlier, or rather heard, Falcon 9 propellant load began at T-minus 35 minutes. Daryl did a great job of explaining the propellants on Dragon. Let's talk a little bit about the propellants. The first and second stages of Falcon 9 are each loaded with 2 liquid propellants. One is fuel, loaded into a tank at the bottom of the stage. The other, an oxidizer, loaded into a tank at the top of the stage. The fuel that we use to power the Merlin engines is a refined kerosene, referred to as RP1 or Rocket Propellant 1. The oxidizer loaded on each stage is a densified liquid oxygen, or LOX. Densified meaning that it's kept much colder than typical for launch vehicles, therefore it takes up less volume, which allows for us to put more of that oxidizer into the first and second stages. To ignite the fuel and the oxidizer in the Merlin rocket engine, we use the ignition fluids of triethyl aluminum and triethyl boron, also called TTEB. Now, when TTEB comes into contact with oxygen, it burns, giving off a green-colored flame. Once we have the flame going, we add a little bit of that kerosene fuel into the Merlin chamber, and the engine ramps up to full power. Now, actually, you might see that green flash just as the second stage engine ignites following stage separation. Now, topping off, helium into pressure vessels on both stages also underway. This is used to pressurize the tanks in flight as propellant is pulled out by the Merlin turbopumps. You can think of this similar to when you're drinking out of a plastic water bottle. You have to put some air back into the bottle in order to keep it from crumpling. So that's exactly what we're doing with that helium. On board the spacecraft, the astronauts are monitoring the systems while propellants are loaded into the Falcon 9 below them. The crew's training in the simulator here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, actually includes playback of sounds recorded in Dragon capsules during recent flights. So even though today is the first day they're hearing it live, they are prepared for these new sounds. Now, the range continues to report no problems.
Stage 1 cryo-helium loading has started.
They are go to support launch. Weather also continues to look great. Currently winds from the west-southwest at 9 miles per hour. Great conditions. We only have a 5% probability of violation for those constraints, so all in all, looking good. As I mentioned earlier, today we have an instantaneous launch time. So at this point, if we hear a hold for any reason, we'll have to stand down and target our backup launch opportunity, which is tomorrow, just under 24 hours from tonight's planned launch. Now at T-minus 30 minutes and 6 seconds, let's turn it over to Jesse and Gary for an overview of events that we'll see after liftoff.
Thanks, Kate. For Crew-6, the astronauts' flight to station will take about 25 hours.
Now, as we wait for that T0 mark in just under 30 minutes, the ground operations teams are doing a series of system checks to make sure that both the Dragon and the Falcon 9 are ready for launch. You're looking at a live view of our teams at the Cape as they prepare for liftoff. Now, as we wait for that launch clock to hit 0, we wanted to give you an overview of what the ascent portion of the mission is going to look like.
Once we hit T0 and a successful launch occurs, we will watch Falcon 9 and Dragon lift off from historic launch pad 39A and make their ascent.
At about 50 seconds into flight, Falcon 9's engines will throttle down to help pass through the period of maximum dynamic pressure on the rocket, or what we typically refer to as max Q. It's worth noting that once we hit max Q, the vehicle will be going supersonic.
Now, once we are through the period of maximum dynamic pressure, we can throttle up our 9 Merlin engines again. From there, at about 2.5 minutes into flight, we have a series of 3 events that will happen in rapid succession.
First is MECO, or main engine cutoff. This is where all 9 Merlin 1D engines shut off in preparation for stage separation, which is our second event. This is where the first stage detaches from the second stage, with the first stage making its way back to Earth for landing, as a second stage continues its journey with the third event, SES-1, or second stage engine start number 1, where the MVAC engine lights up and propels the second stage, along with our Crew-6 astronauts, into orbit.
As Stage 2 heads towards its targeted drop-off orbit, Stage 1 will execute 2 burns in order to make its way back down to Earth. The first is the entry burn. That's where 3 of the M1D engines will reignite and then shut down again. This helps to slow the stage down in preparation for entry back into the Earth's atmosphere.
And while that first stage is heading back to Earth, the second stage will cut off its 1 Merlin engine that was ignited right after stage separation. Once this happens, we'll wait for a confirmation of a good orbital insertion.
About 90 seconds after Dragon gets into orbit, Falcon 9 will land back on Earth. The landing burn is just a single engine burn, but it's powerful enough to bring the vehicle speed down rapidly in order to land on the drone ship at about 9.5 minutes into the mission.
While Falcon 9 first stage is landing, Dragon is preparing to separate from the second stage. At about 3 minutes after the second stage gets into orbit, we should have a great view of Dragon with its 4-person crew drifting away from the second stage. Once Dragon is a short distance away, it'll begin checking out its Draco maneuvering thrusters to make sure Dragon continues to increase separation distance from that second stage. It's worth noting that these are not the Super Draco engines that would be used during an abort scenario.
About 40 seconds after separation, Dragon's nose cone deploy sequence will begin. It will take roughly 4 minutes for the nose cone hooks to unlatch and open, exposing its guidance navigation controls that will help Dragon autonomously fly to the space station.
And lastly, once the nose cone is deployed, thrusters on the forward bulkhead will be checked. From there, over the next 25 hours, Dragon will be on its approach and rendezvous phases, undergoing a number of phasing burns as it makes its way to the station. And all of that will be coming up soon, but for now, let's check back in with Courtney in Mission Control Houston. Courtney.
Thanks, Gary. The flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston are laser focused on the onboard systems of the space station, ensuring it is ready to receive Crew Dragon. They're also making sure all communication links between the station, Dragon, and the ground are working properly. The consensus to this point is that everything is proceeding right on track. The team here in Mission Control Houston, the team in Hawthorne, and the astronauts aboard the space station will monitor the autonomous docking of the Dragon spacecraft tomorrow. They'll perform a series of leak checks, then work to open the hatches on both the Dragon side and inside the station's pressurized mating adapter. We expect hatch opening to take place about an hour and a half after docking. And once on board, the astronauts will be greeted by the space station crew and will then join in for welcoming remarks for the new crew members. From there on out, they will no longer be referred to as Crew-6, but rather as flight engineers of the International Space Station until their return back to Earth. Here in Mission Control Houston, Flight Director Chris Dobbins is on console overseeing the team for launch. And that'll do it from here in Mission Control Houston, so I'll toss it back over to our team in Florida. Daryl, how's it looking?
Thank you very much, Courtney. And we're out here at the Kennedy Space Center. Folks are gathering on the lawn now, getting ready for this launch, and it's a beautiful sight behind us, Raja.
It's looking pretty good. It's a great view, and looking forward to seeing my first launch and watching another turtle go to space.
Yeah, we're going to watch the launch. We're going to watch you. see your reaction. Well, if you're just joining us, we are T-minus 24 minutes and counting now until the 6th astronaut rotation mission to the International Space Station under NASA's Commercial Crew Program. Commander Stephen Bowen, pilot Woody Hoburg, and mission specialists Sultan Alneyadi and Andrey Fedyaev are strapped into their seats inside Dragon Endeavour. They're in that capsule right there as the Falcon 9 rocket fueling operation is well underway. The launch escape system is armed, and that means Dragon is prepared to launch itself away from the Falcon 9 in case of an emergency on the pad or after liftoff. So far, operations look and sound as expected, counting down to that liftoff at 1:45 and 3 seconds a.m. Eastern Time.
Yep, and we heard the call from the Corps that the Stage 2 cryo-helium load had started, and like they described out at Hawthorne, so far what we've loaded is the gas to pressurize the tanks. Around probably about 3-ish minutes from now, we'll actually start the gas itself. So, like they were describing, you need pressure to move the gas, and then you need the actual gas in the LOX itself. So, right now they are loading that helium that pressurizes the tanks, and then the next thing will be the fuel and then the oxidizer.
Those inert gases, key to pressurizing those, especially the LOX. This mission is the continuation of rotational crew flights to the International Space Station from U.S. soil on private rockets and spacecraft, and it would have been possible without the success of course, NASA SpaceX Demo 2, that test flight, now two and a half years ago. Of course, it was the safe delivery and return of Crews 1 and 2 that got the operational flights rolling. There you can see inside the Dragon.
You can see their visors are down and will stay down now since the LES is armed, and you can see they're also not writing or doing anything more at this point with the LES armed. You just have to wait until they're done with that, the prop loading.
Yep. And you can see now evidence that that liquid oxygen is flowing into that first stage as it super chills the outer skin of the rocket, and then it condenses the Florida humid air into a little bit of a cloud there. Talking about the crew inside, the commander of Crew-6 is Captain Stephen Bowen. He hails from Cohasset, Massachusetts. He's married with 3 children. He holds the title of first U.S. Navy submarine officer to be selected as a mission specialist by NASA. Captain Bowen is also a veteran of NASA space flights, including space shuttle flights on STS-126, 132, and 133.
And Steve's a veteran spacewalker and just a great veteran to have around the office, and great commander to have for 3 rookies. He's just, and I think what we've learned about submarines is they're a lot like a space station. Kayla, who's also a submarine, likes to say that both things are, putting people where people aren't meant to be, and a lot of the systems and ways you have to work together are very similar.
And you need good people working together in those tight quarters. Sitting next to Stephen is pilot Warren Woody Hoburg. The 37-year-old is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He studied aeronautics and astronautics from MIT before getting a doctorate in electrical engineering and computer science from the University of California, Berkeley. During grad school, Hoburg worked as an EMT with the Yosemite Search and Rescue. I've seen pictures of him on a rope. He's scaling Half Dome. Crew-6 will be Hoburg's first flight since NASA selected him to be an astronaut in 2017. He is one sharp fellow, but also a great guy.
Yeah, and also a turtle, so proud to see him going up there as yet another member of our, and super excited. Woody, like you said, just amazingly brilliant, but also just so operationally sound. His time working as a rescuing people from ridiculous places.
Right.
I mean, we're not talking run-of-the-mill off a ski slope. We're talking like off of rock faces and cliffs and just some crazy stuff. And doing that and carrying someone else with you who's injured is no joke.
High-risk rescues, and it's incredible what he's been able to accomplish before becoming an astronaut. In the role of mission specialist is astronaut Sultan Alneyadi.
Stage 2, RP-1 load complete.
Okay, we heard the RP-1 complete in the Stage 2. Stage 1 will continue going all the way down to around T-minus 6 minutes. Back to Sultan. He was chosen by the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center of the United Arab Emirates to be part of Expeditions 68-69. The father of 5 spent most of his life in Al Ain in Abu Dhabi. But in 2020, he traded it all in for astronaut training in Houston at NASA's Johnson Space Center, and this will be his first trip to space.
Yeah, and so important to have our UAE partners with us, the first long-duration UAE flight. So what a historic moment for UAE and for NASA to be working in partnership with them. Like you heard Hazad mention earlier, Sultan and him had trained together at Roscosmos, now trained together here, and it's cool to see Sultan now going up there on a U.S. commercial rocket to go to the space station.
And now we just heard the call. The strong back chill has begun, and you can see the condensing of the outside air, that super chilled liquid oxygen, both chilling the rocket and, of course, the venting of that LOX going out into the air. Our next mission specialist, Andrey Fedyaev. It's also his first trip to space for the second mission specialist. He's a Roscosmos cosmonaut, and he will be working to monitor the spacecraft during the dynamic launch and re-entry phases of flight. He will be a flight engineer for Expedition 68.
And considering the partnership with cosmonauts riding on Dragons and U.S. astronauts riding on Soyuz, so great to see that continuing, and Andrey, the latest cosmonaut heading up on a Dragon.
And happy birthday to him. He turns 42. What a way to celebrate. Each of these 4 crew members will be part of the Expedition 68 once they arrive at the International Space Station. At this moment, Raja, what's the crew feeling?
I think it's hoping that everything continues. You've trained so long for this. You obviously don't want to get what's called go fever, when meaning you're going to ignore a problem, but you're just kind of just hoping that there's not any problems that pop up at this point. And most of it's honestly out of your control. But you have complete trust in the team. This is where. The reason we've trained so long and trained with these actual operators, the same people who are in the loops, is if there are any issues, you can hear it in their voices. You've worked with them, you know them. Complete confidence in the JSC and MCCX, the Hawthorne teams, and just actually looking forward to actually getting to execute what you've trained so long to do.
It makes sense. So much work and so much effort over the years has gone in to get to this point. You want to keep going.
Yep. Yeah, and it's and I think right now, just the final, my guess is what they're talking through is, so again, on those displays, they're probably looking forward to a few events and talking through those. And so specifically, they are probably talking through the different launch abort phases. So you'll hear, once they actually lift off, you'll hear Stephen calling 1A, 1B, 2A. Those are the different launch abort stages. And what they're probably talking through right now is the timing of that, what things they're looking for on the displays, and just again, sort of rehearsing as much as you can, because once it happens, it kind of running through things over and over again. The other thing there.
Start of stage 2 lock load.
Right. So there's the start of the locks being loaded on stage 2. You heard the call there, so things still progressing well. And so the crew has a timeline of these events, so that's another way they can kind of QC if things are proceeding, maybe if the fuel is taking longer or slower to slow, so they're kind of comparing where they're sitting on the clock versus those calls, and gives them a sense of how things are going. But there's no immediate direct telemetry in the Dragon capsule that tells you all the subsystems in the F9 rocket. You're relying on the timing and some cues and listening to these calls to know what's going on with the rocket itself. Once it launches, you have telemetry on the F9 engines, the status of the throttling command. So he talked about out at Hawthorne, the max Q event and the throttle down. You can see that, you can feel it. And actually, that was probably what I thought as one of the coolest things about our launch was that we could feel and hear the throttle down before we saw it in the telemetry. So for all the automation and all the coolness of electronics, I thought it was amazing and very awesome that the person could still beat the machine.
How about that?
But so that's kind of what since they don't have that insight to the F9 rocket, they're relying on the calls and the timing as they are sitting now, and just making sure everything's on track.
Critical communications to the astronauts so they know exactly what's going on, as Raja mentioned. If you're outside and getting ready to watch this launch, you can hear it on the radio. It'll be available on local amateur VHF radio frequency 146.940 megahertz and on the UHF radio frequency 444.925 megahertz FM mode, heard within Brevard County on the Space Coast.
So the next thing you should be, as we get closer to 10 minutes, they're going to make sure the launch displays are set up. And the reason they're going to do that is because once the launch happens, you have the ability all the displays are touchscreen, so you can change them and move them, but you don't want to be doing that during launch. And so there's a check in there to make sure you have all the views you want. Generally, what I'm guessing they'll do is they'll scroll on the procedure to where they expect so they don't have to scroll while they're under G's. They'll make sure that the mission specialists have the views that they need. You can see Andrey's actually reaching up there right now, so they'll kind of check to make sure that their line of sight is not obstructed, and that one more check of probably the volume control of their seats, that everyone can hear each other. Maybe give it a few clicks to account for the fact that it's going to get a little louder after launch.
All right, let's get another update from SpaceX and check in with Kate Tice.
Thanks, Daryl. We are T-minus 13 minutes and 47 seconds from launch. Everything's still looking good for tonight's Falcon 9 launch for Dragon Crew-6. If you've been following along, you know that Falcon 9 began propellant load at T-minus 35 minutes. Loading of the RP-1 fuel on the second stage is complete. That finished around T-minus 20 minutes. Fuel loading on the first stage continues. It's approximately 75% full and will finish around T-minus 6 minutes. Densified liquid oxygen loading is underway on both the first and second stages. They are looking about 80% full on the first stage and just under 10% on the second stage. That will wrap up at T-minus 3 minutes and T-minus 2 minutes respectively. Checkouts of the thrust vector controllers, what we call TVC wiggles, those are coming up. That's basically when we use those thrust vector controllers to slightly move each engine nozzle. That's what allows Falcon 9 to steer itself during ascent. Dragon mission director and team reporting no major issues at this time. Communication checkouts are complete. The crew access arm is retracted, as you can see there on your screen. It's nowhere in sight. The crew access arm, the launch escape system is armed, and the crew is strapped into their seats and ready to go to space. Final instructions to the crew will come at T-minus 10 minutes. The crew displays will be configured for launch. That setup gives the crew insight into how the launch is proceeding and provides constant updates on vehicle health. You can see the crew there on the right-hand side of your screen now, looking pretty comfortable. At T-minus 5 minutes, we'll be in terminal count, and Dragon will then transition to internal power. We'll hear continued callouts on the countdown net as we continue to get closer to liftoff. Green for launch, ready to go. Weather also still looking really good. Winds down to 4 miles per hour coming from the west. Only a 5% chance of violation for the criteria, so continues to look good. I'm sure if it was daylight, it would probably be a cloudless sky for the most part there at Kennedy Space Center. So with that in mind, let's go back to Daryl at Kennedy as we continue to approach liftoff just under 11 and a half minutes from now.
All right, good call-outs there, Kate. Appreciate that. Some final thoughts from the commander of Crew 3 before we watch Crew 6 lift off.
It's a great time to be here. You'll hear them in a few minutes. When they make the 10-minute call and confirm their displays are ready, the crew will probably give a message thanking folks and just the thoughts on their mind. There's a lot of work and a lot of people that have worked a long time to get them here, and it's a pretty special moment.
And when they lift off, they'll be 260 miles over southwest of New Zealand. And with that, we want to focus on the pad now as we proceed through the final stretch of the countdown. We'll turn it over to Gary and Kate at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, to take us through launch and ascent.
Thanks, Daryl. The energy is certainly starting to grow as we get closer and closer to T0. As you can see the vehicle there at pad 39A, that's Falcon 9 with the Dragon capsule positioned on top. Now we're going to go through a couple of things, including some physical changes to the pad, but you will likely hear a number of call-outs after liftoff that are basically indicative of the various abort modes that Dragon passes through during flight.
Now T-minus 10 minutes.
Dragon. Configured for launch.
SpaceX Dragon crew displays are configured for launch.
SpaceX copies. On behalf of our entire team at SpaceX, we are honored to have you aboard Dragon Capsule Endeavour today for its next trip to the International Space Station. We wish you a great mission, good luck, Godspeed, and enjoy the ride.
Thank you very much for those kind words. We'd like to thank all the trainers, technicians, engineers, decision makers, and planners who have defined our mission ahead and trained us and given the faith in us to execute that mission. And Crew 6 is ready to launch.
And those words coming from the Crew 6 inside the Dragon right now, under 9 minutes from launch. Those final instructions meaning we are in terminal count. Falcon 9 launch commit criteria is getting checked by the computers. And we're in the final stretch here, inside 10 minutes until liftoff. Kate was mentioning a series of number and letter combinations that you'll hear upon ascent once we get to that point. That'll be those different abort modes that we'll be tracking throughout the ascent. There's an Alpha and Bravo on the first stage, and there's 2A through 2E on the second stage as we track it up the eastern seaboard. Right now coming up on T-minus 8 minutes, the next major milestone that we'll be hearing will be about the engine chill.
That's right. That's a important step of the countdown. That's basically when at T-minus 7 minutes, we will open the pre-valves of the engines to allow a little bit of the super chilled liquid oxygen into the Merlin turbopumps prior to the full flow of LOX that occurs during ignition. Now, that's important because at this point in time, all the hardware is at ambient temperature. So by opening the pre-valves and flowing a little bit of that super chilled, densified liquid oxygen helps prepare the hardware for that colder temperature when the full flow of LOX occurs. We should hear that call out in about 10 seconds.
Engine chill.
And there's that call out indicating that those pre-valves have been opened, and now there's a little bit of that super chilled liquid oxygen flowing through the hardware, basically chilling it out prior to liftoff.
That's right. In the meantime, we're tracking fuel on the vehicle. Stage 2 RP1, or the fuel on the second stage, is complete. It's one of the earlier tanks to be completely filled in the countdown. But as we continue to track the fuel loading, the next thing will be the Stage 1 RP load.
Complete.
That's coming up here in about 15 seconds. Later in the countdown, we'll be tracking the tanks of oxidizer being completely filled.
That RP1 load is now complete on the first stage. So at this point in time, all RP1 is now on Falcon 9, both for the first and second stages. LOX load continues, wrapping up at about T-minus 3 minutes for first stage and T-minus 2 minutes for the second stage. Coming up, we'll hear the call for Dragon to...
Dragon SpaceX, for awareness, we are seeing a T-tab load issue and are troubleshooting. We are currently still go, but have further evaluation before making a final decision. We'll get you a final read before T0.
And SpaceX Dragon comes.
That call out there just communicating to the crew that the launch teams are troubleshooting a small issue with T-Teb, and they will have some more information for the crew in the next couple of minutes. That T-Teb, as I mentioned earlier.
Dragon isn't configured for terminal count.
And there's that call.
Tanks are pressurizing for strong back retract.
A lot of information coming through right now, just indicating that that Dragon is now on internal power, and now we are basically preparing to retract the strong back, which is the white structure there to the right of the rocket. We will see the clamps open just under the Dragon trunk. Those will begin to open, and the strong back will retract away from the vehicle.
Yeah, that's right. We'll see those clamps on the top of the structure there, just under the Dragon's trunk, which you can identify by the black solar panels on the left of the base of the capsule itself and to the right. And then the structure itself will lean about 2 degrees, and then it will retract the rest of the way once Dragon actually hits that T0 mark and lifts off. We're seeing those clamps being undone now. The 2-degree lean will be very subtle, and then you'll see it more when we hit that T0 mark.
That's right. At liftoff, Falcon 9 the TE will actually retract to 45 degrees to clear the way for Falcon 9. That TE is basically what has the umbilicals that attach to the vehicle that provide power, telemetry, and fluids prior to liftoff.
Now coming up in 10 seconds, we'll be listening for a call on Stage 1 liquid oxygen load being complete.
Dragon is in terminal count and on internal power.
Minus 2 minutes,
This
30
is the
seconds.
LD on countdown 1. Hold, hold, hold. We are standing down due to a T-tab ground issue.
As you just heard, we
On
have
support, head started.
As you just heard, we have a hold tonight due to the T-tab issue that I mentioned prior, and the
Dragon SpaceX with that call from LD. You are go to step into 5.100 launch scrub.
5.100 launch scrub. That's in work.
As with everything else, we are prepared for all scenarios, including, unfortunately, as we've seen tonight, a scrub. So the teams are now stepping into those procedures.
That's right. Again, it was the teams were tracking a ground issue with T-tab. That's the ignition fluid that actually sparks with the oxidizer and allows the engines to fire. The teams were tracking this issue. And so we're in a nominal scrub configuration. We'll start to see sort of a sequence of reversing some of the milestones we've been tracking as part of this countdown until the crew access arm swings back to the side hatch. And so the crew can egress the vehicle as part of a nominal launch scrub.
So for those of you just joining at about just under T minus 2.5 minutes, we unfortunately had a scrub due to a T-tab issue with the ground systems. So as Gary mentioned, we are in a nominal scrub configuration. There we have our procedures now being enacted to basically reverse all the progress that we made this evening, including propellant offload and bringing that crew access arm back into position and getting the astronauts out. Up until that point, everything was looking good. The ground team had reported that issue. I believe it was around T minus 5 minutes. At this point in time, the launch escape system is still armed, with the crew continuing to look comfortable there inside Dragon Endeavour.
And Dragon, LD on countdown 1. At this time, our offloads are underway. Vehicle is safe and proceeding nominally with offload. Expecting about a 50-minute offload.
SpaceX Dragon copies about a 50-minute offload. And we'll be sitting here waiting. Thanks.
So it will be a very methodical process to offload the Falcon 9 with the propellant and oxidizer. You can see some of that oxygen billowing off still. That'll be part of the sequence. They've also re-enabled auxiliary power by umbilical to the Dragon as they work their way through the nominal scrub timeline. Again, that's a 50-minute offload. For those, again, that are joining, we are in a scrub situation just under 2 minutes and 30 seconds from launch. Teams declared a scrub due to tracking a ground issue with T-tab. This is the ignition fluid that's used for the first and second stages that ignites the oxidizer for igniting the engines themselves to lift Dragon and into space. They were tracking this issue and declared a scrub again at the 2-minute 30-second mark. So we're going through a nominal scrub with a 50-minute fuel offload You can see the strong back clamps have been re-enabled. After we